Chapter 19. You can see me, right? Izuku nods, barely. Class won't start for another 15 minutes or so, and the room is still only half full. Ida is nearly a perfect image of poise right now, sitting straight backed at his desk like he always is, as if there aren't barely noticeable wet spots on Izuku's school blazer right now. Ida Tensei is no longer hovering over his brother's shoulder because he's moved to hover over Izuku's instead. He looks pretty normal, as ghosts go, and Izuku's privately glad of that. He doesn't really want to know what a murder victim of Stain's might look like. I don't understand, Tensei says. You're Midoriya, right? Tenya's told me about you. He said your quirk was strength and... Izuku takes out his notebook and a pencil. It's complicated, he writes. Seeing ghosts is the power I was born with. The strength came later. The air around him drops a little in temperature when Ida's brother leans in to read over his shoulder. Oh, he says, and sounds confused. Izuku keeps writing. I'm sorry that this happened to you. It's my own fault, Tensei says softly. I shouldn't have been alone. Especially against an enemy with a reputation like that. But I wasn't thinking straight. I wasn't thinking at all. And now Izuku looks up to see Tensei looking across the room to where Ida sits. Gently he nudges Tensei for attention and writes another note. Is there anything I can do to help? H-Hop? If there's anything you want to say to him, I can try to pass the message along. Pass that, does he know? Tensei asks. About what you can do? Izuku shakes his head. I can find a way. I always do. The ghost of Ingenium is quiet for a moment. I thank you. For offering. And thank you for when Tenya walked in well. It means a lot to me. And I'll think about it, but for now, not yet. His hands ring at his sides. He looks fuzzy around the edges, he's not unstable, but that doesn't mean he isn't still upset. Offers always open, Izuku writes. He looks again, pursing his lips, and takes in Tensei's quiet misery. He's watching Ida again, but not yet moving back to him, swaying forward, but not quite taking the steps. Izuku has seen pictures of Ingenium, videos of his heroics and the like, and he never imagined him looking so hopelessly lost. Mindful of how close Bakugo is in front of him, he barely moves his mouth as he says under his breath, "Do you want to talk? If you do, I'll listen." Tensei moves closer, either to catch Izuku's words or because the offer tempts him. He wavers. I don't want to burden you with it. It isn't nice what happened to me. Try me, Izuku murmurs back. You wouldn't be the first. I can handle. Bakugo whirls around in his seat, spitting with rage. For fuck's sake, Deku, stop goddamn muttering, he snaps. Izuku shuts his mouth and shrugs at Tensei. The ghost is quiet for a moment. Izuku waits patiently. There isn't even that much to tell, Tensei bursts out in a sudden rush, like it's something he's been dying hard to get off his chest. It wasn't what I thought it would be. I mean, fuck. Izuku blinks, vaguely surprised to hear language like that from his straight-laced friend's older brother. You get these visions in your head, you know. When you're a pro, or God, you don't even have to be a pro, I bet you get little fantasies like that, too. Putting your life on the line for others. Dying like a martyr in the line of duty. Going down fighting. Bravery and sacrifice and glory, and he stops short, and one glance tells Izuku that it's because he's trying not to cry. But it's not like that. He just, I shouldn't have been there. I shouldn't have taken him on alone, because I couldn't even tell what he did. I couldn't move. Ha ha. Ha. A bitter little laugh tumbles out of his mouth. Me, the hero that relies on speed. I couldn't move. No one knew that I was there. He could take his time. He could talk and blow it and watch me squirm. And then... I don't know if he ran out of things to say, or he got bored, or the ghost's voice trails off. I didn't die right away. I was still sort of there when he left. And when he was gone, I thought maybe I'd get lucky. Maybe someone would find me. Maybe I could get out of it alive and see my brother again. Izuku hears his next words as loud and clear as if Tensei were whispering them in an empty room. But nobody came. The empty desk next to him scrapes out of the way, and suddenly Kirishima's there. In a moment of mild panic, Izuku slaps his notebook shut. Midoriya. Hey, I didn't get to talk to you after the festival, and I just wanted to tell you who her. Izuku looks up at him and finds Kirishima inches away from his face, staring goggle-eyed at him. Dude. Your face looks rad. Izuku's mind is a noisy mess. I'm serious. Kirishima's sharp teeth show in a wide grin. I'm not making fun of you, I promise. I really think your scar looks awesome. It's like the halfway point between me and Todoroki. His eyes widen further, which shouldn't even be possible. Dude. That's from Todoroki's ice punch, isn't it? Todoroki picks that moment to slip in and take his seat, and Kirishima sees Izuku's line of vision move. He looks over his shoulder and gives a cheery grin and wave. Todoroki's nose, Izuku notices, is still visibly crooked. Luckily, class starts soon after, forcing Izuku into something resembling a better headspace once he has other things to focus on. Aizawa's bandages are off, but that just means everyone can see the scarring on his face. If even Recovery Girl couldn't fix that, then that probably means those marks are going to stick with him for good. When Aizawa passes by Ida's desk on the way in, does he surreptitiously rest his hand on Ida's shoulder, just for a moment? It's too quick to catch. Izuku can't help it, his mouth drops open when Aizawa puts the draft nomination numbers up on the board. Bakugo and Todoroki have far and away the most, both of them numbering in the thousands. Uraraka and Ida are both up there too, and even Sero managed to grab a few nominations for himself. And as for Izuku, he spots his name at the bottom. He's tied with Sero. Beside him, Ray pats his shoulder excitedly and dances in place, and in spite of himself, he sits a little taller. Uraraka twists around in her seat to grin at him, and he smiles back. Midnight Sensei joins the class shortly after that to help with the other focus for today. Hero names. The class descends into a brainstorming session, and Izuku is hard-pressed not to knock his head repeatedly against his desk. He's dreamed of this for years. He's imagined having his own hero codename practically since he first learned to talk. But whenever he tried to brainstorm before, all he ever came up with were variations on All Might. Of course he did. He was a kid, and All Might was who he wanted to be like. But now, it just feels too childish. Too embarrassing. If he can't measure up to All Might yet, then it'd be way too presumptuous to name himself after him. Not to mention a little on the nose, his connection to All Might is supposed to be a secret, after all. Mind blank, Izuku looks around at his classmates. Everyone's murmuring together, laughing at each other's attempts, bouncing ideas off each other. It seems like everyone has more ideas and better ideas than he does. The only ones who are being remotely quiet about it are Todoroki and Ida. Todoroki's always quiet, and Ida. I didn't get to tell him. Tensei's back. Izuku looks up at him and tilts his head, asking his question silently. I didn't get to tell him. Tensei's pale hands curl into fists. There is something, Midoriya. I don't know if you can find a way to tell him in a way that won't hurt him. So you don't have to tell him yet. But the devastation on his face is raw. I realized something right at the last minute. I mean, when Stain was, he stopped short, shutting his eyes tight for a moment. There was a moment when I realized, this is it. This is where I die. The last thing I ever said to Tenya really is the last thing. Tears leak out from between his eyelids. And I realized there was one more thing I wanted to tell him. So if you ever find a way to tell him the truth about what you can do, the dead hero's blank eyes turn to him, desperate and pleading. Tell him I want him to have my name. Tell him I want Ingenium to live on through him. Izuku's heart lurches and he gives the smallest nod he can manage. I'll try, he whispers. Deku. Uraraka hops into his space, hands braced on his desk with the pinkies raised to keep from activating her quirk. Any ideas? I think I've got mine. I'm coming up empty, Izuku admits. His voice cracks on the way out and he coughs a little. You okay? Uraraka cocks her head to the side, almost bird-like. Is something going on with you and Ida? You both have been sort of weird today. I can't say, Izuku says, which is a wonderful phrase because of how ambiguous and misleading it is. This name thing is sort of taking all my thoughts right now. I'm kind of surprised. You're the biggest hero fanboy I know. Did you really never imagine what your name might be if you ever became one? Well, yeah. Izuku pulls a wry face. Doesn't mean any of them were usable. Uraraka giggles. Oh come on, I bet he can't think of anything worse than Bakugo, she says, as if he isn't sitting in the desk right in front of them. Bakugo hears it and twists around in his own seat, face thunderous. Deku, I swear to fuck, he snarls. One word, and I'll make your right eye match your left. An. As Rei responds with a challenging hiss, Izuku blinks at him, shocked. It's not that he isn't used to Bakugo's threats and insults. But he's also used to the feelings that come with them. He's used to the spike in fear and the sickening dread that fouls his stomach. He's used to feeling small whenever he hears his old nickname in Bakugo's voice. And he doesn't, this time. Bakugo's tone and temper make him tense, but the word Deku falls effortlessly on his ears and skims off of him harmlessly. When did that start happening? Maybe, he thinks, it started when Deku stopped meaning useless and started meaning I can do it. Deku. Uraraka ducks into his line of vision. You sort of spaced out there, are you okay? Yeah, he blurts out. I'm okay. It's no small thing, reclaiming a name that has been used to grind him under someone's heels since he was small. But he does it, and the look on Bakugo's face is priceless. Ida doesn't take a hero name. Izuku wrestles with the message locked behind his tongue and feels Tensei's eyes bore into him from across the room. Izuku knows it's coming when Ida doesn't join him and Uraraka for lunch. He feels the dread gathering like syrupy storm clouds in his stomach, and he knows Uraraka suspects something. She's too smart to have missed the way he dodged her question earlier, and she sees through his carefully noncommittal noises when she wonders aloud where Ida's gone. It happens when lunch is maybe half over. Izuku feels jittery enough to burn off excess nervous energy by browsing his phone. He hits the news app, refreshes it a few times, and there it is. Ida Tensei, the hero and Jillian, was found dead on Saturday. The hero killer made no attempt to hide his involvement. Stain was behind this, and he wanted everyone to know about it. Of course, this is not news to Izuku. He's been talking to Tensei's ghost out of the corner of his mouth all morning. He imagines, for a moment, that the buzz of the cafeteria hall gets a little quiet. Not all at once, just in fits and spurts, sections at a time as people check their own news feeds and share with the people around them. He imagines eyes on them, people looking instinctively to their table where Ingenium's younger brother always sits. He has no idea if that's really happening or not, and there's no real way to tell. Beside him, he hears Uraraka's soft gasp. Oh no. The quiet horror in her voice wrenches his head back into the space it was in when Tensei was telling him how he died. Izuku puts down his chopsticks. Suddenly, the thought of food makes his stomach roil. Oh, Ida. Izuku is out of his seat in a flash, barely registering Uraraka's voice. Deku. Deku, wait a minute. Bathroom, he says, and walks out of the cafeteria before he can say or do something embarrassing. Or worse, incriminating. He walks, turning corners at random until he finds an empty section of the hallway where he can lean against the wall and slide down to the floor. Dimly he's aware of Rei hovering nearby, not close enough to crowd him, but close enough that he knows she's there. He puts his head between his knees and breathes. He's always known that a hero's life is dangerous. He never knew the hero Ingenium before he showed up as a ghost. But this is the first time that the danger has fully struck him. The USJ came close because he nearly died and Aizawa nearly died, but they still got out of it. And this is the first time he's ever seen a ghost with a face he recognized. And it isn't fear building and churning in his chest, because the fear's always been there and it's more like an annoying roommate than a weakness, but the rolling pressure won't go away. It's not fear, but it's a lot of things, sadness and anger and so many other things that he can't put a name to. Kiddo. He jolts, but he knows the voice. Miss Shimoa stands over him, and then she crouches by him, not keeping her distance quite as well as Rei does. Hey. Kiddo, hey. Cool hands press the sides of his head, and Izuku half-jerks on a sob and hopes that no one living walks by and sees him. Tashi's on his way, I think. Just hang tight, okay? And that's fine, he thinks. He's not sure what he'd do if one of his classmates showed up, or some stranger who doesn't know him. But if it's just All Might, then that's okay. Hastily he struggles to his feet and wipes his eyes on instinct, even though they technically aren't wet yet. True to Ms. Shimura's word, he hears his mentor's distinctive heavy footsteps, and All Might steps around the corner in his hero form. He isn't smiling. "I was hoping for a word, my boy," he says. His voice is oddly gentle, and that sounds strange when it comes from him in this form. "Just a quick one. I'm sure you saw the news." Izuku nods shakily. "I saw you hurrying out of the cafeteria just now," All Might says. "I thought that might have been what spooked you." "I'm not," Izuku rasped out. His throat feels like sandpaper. I'm not scared. I mean, I am," but he sucks in a breath. That's not why." All Might is quiet for a moment, and Izuku privately wonders how much time he has in this form. "Do you want to talk about it?" "I'm not sure how much help I can be, but I'm mad." It comes out as a hiss, spat out through his teeth even as he feels tears well up in his eyes. "Or I'm sad. I'm both, and I don't know what to do with it." He shoves his hands in his pockets because he can't get the damn things to stop shaking. "That's understandable, my boy." All Might rests a hand lightly on his shoulder. In the back of his mind, Izuku wonders at how gentle a hand that size can be. "And believe you me, the hero killer will be stopped." "It shouldn't have happened," Izuku blurted. He's not sure why the words are spilling out. It's not like he has anything to prove. It's not like All Might is likely to disagree. It shouldn't have. Everyone says he preaches about phony heroes. The words taste foul as he spits them out. And nobody deserves that, but this was ingenuine, and he was good, and the tears that come out feel so hot with anger that they nearly scald on their way down his face. He thinks of Tensei telling him, but nobody came. "And I'm mad because he was Ida's brother, and Ida loved him, and Stain left him in an alley like he was trash." The hand on his shoulder moves to his head, ruffling his hair gently as if he's a little kid, and in spite of himself, Izuku leans into the touch. "You're right to be angry," All Might tells him. Izuku wipes his face on his sleeve. "Sorry, I'm crying again." "I think the situation calls for it, don't you?" All Might says gently. "Because like he said, you're angry, and you're sad, and you have every right to be." "I'm worried about Ida," Izuku sniffles. "And I feel really useless, and that just makes the worrying worse." "You aren't useless," All Might informs him. "But if you feel that way, and you are worried for your friend, then why not put the two together? Be there for your classmate. Ask him what he needs. Make sure he knows that he is not alone." He lifts his hand away. "I'll do what I can, of course, as his teacher. But at times like these, young Ida needs his friends." Izuku nods. "Okay." All Might's phone chimes in his pocket, and he startles a little. I'd better get back to the lounge." "Will you be all right from here, my boy?" "I'll be fine," Izuku says. "Thanks, All Might." "In a time, my boy." His steps are hurried as he leaves. Miss Shimura lingers a while longer. "I can't speak for your friend," she says. "No one can, really. I think your best bet is to ask, always. Don't push." "I know," Izuku says, wiping his eyes again. I wish I could do more." "You just like Tashi," Miss Shimura sighs. "Sometimes I stop to wonder why he picked you, but I never wonder very long. You're like peas in a pod." Izuku laughs softly. "Hey, Miss Shimura." She pauses, looking like she's about to move off. "Yeah, Bean Sprout." "What is it? Are you ever going to tell me who you are?" Ray moves in the corner of his vision, catching his attention for a split second. When he looks back, Miss Shimura is gone. A stroke of luck comes his way by the end of the school day in the form of a ghost. More specifically, this ghost is not a pro-hero or anyone recognizable. He's an elderly man clutching at Izuku's arm with cold, wrinkled hands and a frantic play. Izuku listens and finds both a problem and possibly a solution. If one more well-wisher comes up to him with condolences, Tenya is going to scream. The story broke during lunch, and it feels as if half the school has trooped by him over the course of the day, with "I am sorry's" and "my thoughts are with yous" and more platitudes that do little more than burn in Tenya's ears. He doesn't want to walk around and absorb strangers' sympathies like a passive waste of space. He wants to go out and do something, but there's nothing he can do. He's not a hero, and he can't track down Stair by himself, which is what the dark, ugly part of his heart desperately wants. Even his family has been treating him with kid gloves, taking away every possible burden he could take on, and that's kind of them, but it leaves him nothing to do. Even Yaoirozu has offered to shoulder more responsibilities as assistant class rep, and Tenya had to argue with her just to get her to let him continue as normal. If anyone comes up to him to take away more things for him to do, then he's only going to feel more helpless. And has been drowning in helplessness since Saturday. Ida. What? It comes out much, much harsher than he intended, because it's the end of the day and is almost free to go home and do absolutely nothing. Mortified, he turns to find Midoriya looking at him with his newly scarred face and wishes for a moment that he had a quirk that would let him sink into the fore. Midoriya, forgive me. Are you free today? Midoriya asks without preamble. I could use your help with something if you have time after school. Tenya gapes at him. It's fine if you don't, Midoriya adds. I was just wondering. I do, Tenya says quickly. I mean, I would be happy to assist you, Midoriya. And I'm grateful, I'm glad you trust me enough to ask. Was that an odd way to phrase it? Oh, good. So you sure you're not busy? Tenya thinks for a moment of his mother, shooing away his offers to help shoulder the fallout of Tensei's death and encouraging him to take time to himself. Not particularly. Midoriya grins. That's good. It's just someone asked me for a favor and it's gonna take me to another part of town, and I could use your help if that's okay with you. For one wild moment, Tenya strongly considers hugging his friend, or maybe asking if he doesn't have an extra quirk that lets him read minds and somehow know exactly what to say. He decides against both. I would love to. And so, Tenya finds himself tagging after Midoriya once the final bell rings. They take the tray together, and Midoriya gives him an apologetic look beforehand. Tenya doesn't understand why until he realizes they are stuck in a crowded train car full of people liable to recognize him. Tenya keeps his head down, and Midoriya holds him in conversation to discourage anyone from rudely interrupting. Midoriya is cautious. Unsure of himself. Hesitant, even. But it manifests as a sort of general awkwardness rather than handling Tenya with kid gloves. A department store. Tenya says when they walk up to their first stop. Yeah, Midoriya says. There's a pet supply store up top, and I need to pick up a couple things. For your cat, I presume. No, for this thing we're doing, Midoriya says as they enter the building. Basically, someone abandoned a dog and now it's under someone's house and won't leave, so yeah. We are gonna get it out and take it to a shelter, if that's cool with you. Tenya blinks at him, surprised. I didn't know you did animal rescue. I don't, I mean, not regularly, Midoriya says cautiously. But, well, I've done stuff like this a couple of times and what gets around, and a year. He shrugs. I see, Tenya says, pausing at the elevator. Top floor, you said. Yeah. I'm gonna take the stairs. Midoriya points to the door by the elevators. If you wanna come too, or if you just wanna meet me up there, that's fine. Oh, Tenya says, faintly surprised. All the way to the top. Can't skip leg day, Midoriya says simply. Was that a dig at Tenya's quirk? If it is, then it's the first time anyone's tried joking with him since this afternoon. It actually kind of makes him want to laugh. I'm right behind you, he says, and follows Midoriya into the stairwell. Also, Midoriya says when they're about halfway up. Elevators are awkward. I figured maybe you wouldn't want to get stuck in one with people who might know your face. For a moment, Tenya stares at him, touched. I thank you, Midoriya, he says. That's very thoughtful of you. Well, I'm a thoughtful person. That's what I'm good at, thinking. Sometimes way too much and out loud. Tenya manages a short, quiet little laugh at that. It's the most he's done since Saturday. Midoriya purchases a small bag of dog treats and the cheapest leash, and another short train ride takes them to a residential neighborhood. They make conversation along the way, from casual, meaningless small talk to discussions of class topics. Midoriya is strangely easy to talk to, mostly because he does so much talking himself that Tenya's tired brain doesn't have to work much to participate. It's restful, almost. That Midoriya gives the subject of Tensei and Stair a wide berth is an extra courtesy. He has to wonder, a few times, if Midoriya isn't distracted by something. He keeps getting these odd looks as if he's thinking about something else. Or he'll seem to look at something over Tenya's shoulder, but when Tenya tries to follow his gaze, he doesn't see anything. Ah, well. It's not as if this is anything new. Midoriya has always been an odd one. Midoriya, Tenya says at one point when his friend pauses. May I ask you something? Sure. Tenya braces himself. How did you know? Midoriya looks at him blankly. Know what? This morning, Tenya continues. The news story hadn't broke yet. It didn't until lunch. So this morning, when I walked in and you saw me, how did you know? It takes Midoriya a while to answer. Tenya's starting to wonder if he'll answer at all when Midoriya gives a little shrug. Something about the look on your face. I thought I was being so careful, Tenya says. It fooled everyone else all day. I have good instincts. There's a note in Midoriya's voice that sounds off somehow. Tenya knows damn well how to tell when he's being brushed off. Midoriya. You just looked like you needed a hug, Midoriya says. I wasn't gonna press you for details. Except, that sounds wrong. That sounds too uncertain to match up with the look that Tenya remembers seeing on Midoriya's face, that cold, dawning horror. Midoriya talks as if it was a vague feeling with no context, no details, nothing concrete. But that dismay in his eyes had been a little too sharp for that to make sense. Midoriya, I consider you a good friend, Tenya says carefully. I trust you a great deal, and I don't want to accuse you of anything. If you're not comfortable talking about it, then that's fine. But that sounds like a lie. He expects Midoriya to brush it off, or backpedal, or get defensive about it. But instead Midoriya hums softly to himself, a thoughtful little sound, and stares forward into the middle distance. Don't take it personally, he says. I lie to everyone. Izuku finds the house that the elderly ghost had directed him to and knocks politely at the door. A woman answers promptly. Hello, he says. I called earlier. I heard about the dog, sir. She looks relieved. Oh, right. Well, you're welcome to try and get it out. Here, it's in the side yard, let me show you. The woman leads them to the side of the house, where there's a small gap that can just barely fit a person through, leading into the dark space beneath the house. It's down there, she says, stooping a little, but it's hard to see beyond the first few feet. We just bought the house and moved in a couple of weeks ago. I think the previous owner died and his dog must have gotten out. She isn't wrong, Izuku knows. The previous owner did die, he's the one who asked Izuku to come. What this lady doesn't know is that his family sold the house and left without bothering to rehome his dog. How very irresponsible, Ida remarks. The woman looks at him, surprised, and Izuku sees recognition flicker in her eyes. Aren't you, she begins. Is it okay if we take a while with this? Izuku asks. It might take a few hours to convince her to come out. Oh, well, that's all right, she says, apparently unperturbed by his interruption. As long as you can take care of the poor thing. I take it myself, but my husband's allergic, and neither of us have the time anyway. Okay, well, thank you. Izuku gives her a polite smile. Oh no, thank you, she says. She leads them to it, and Izuku seats himself by the gap that leads to the crawl space beneath the house. It's dark and cramped further in, but Izuku holds out his phone to illuminate it. Toward the back of the space, he sees the light reflect off a pair of eyes. Ah, I saw it. Ida crouches by him. Do you think one of us can fit under there? Might not be a good idea, Izuku says. It's pretty small and cramped, and if we crowd her she might panic. Good point. What would you suggest, then? Izuku shrugs. Talk quietly, throw in some treats every now and then, and see if she gets used to us being here. Might take a while. That's fine. Ida shifts to sit more comfortably in the dirt beside him. My mother hasn't been letting me help much with, his voice trails off. He finds things to do when he's upset, Tensei explains. He's off to the side, where Ray is teaching him clapping games. It's how he copes. If he can't keep busy in a crisis, he stresses himself to death. Izuku nods. Well, thanks for coming, he says. Stuff like this, it gets pretty boring sometimes. It's no trouble at all, Ida says. He takes a treat out of the bag, aims carefully, and tosses it toward the back of the space. Silence follows, and then rustling and crunching. Well, that's a start, Izuku says. Sure enough, they are there for a while, sitting and talking, plying the dot under the house with a treat every now and then. Izuku's eyes start to adjust to the dark, and he watches as the mound of fur gradually moves closer. It's a quiet day. Izuku could be doing other things, like training or focusing on his hero studies. They both could. But there's plenty of time for that tomorrow. And besides, there's a dog that needs help and an elderly ghost worrying about the poor thing, and that's reason enough to stick around. The dog is a little over halfway to the opening when Izuku's phone vibrates in his pocket. He wrestles it out and checks his latest text message. 442, Todoroki. I'm free today, in case you're still interested in what we were talking about earlier. Izuku winces a little. Todoroki had said Mondays and Wednesdays were good for him, and it had been Izuku's idea. But he can hardly leave Ida now when they're wrist-deep in dirt and making very slow progress that still counts as progress. The last thing he wants to do is give up. If he gives up, it will just be one more heavy thing following him around until he takes care of it. Besides, after today, he's not sure he's in the right state of mind to be throwing punches at people. 443, Izuku. I'm kinda in the middle of something, Iron. I'm sorry. It just kinda came up. I'm close by 231 Kiyashi if you wanna hang up there. He means it as a joke, and is therefore very surprised when Todoroki actually shows up. Shadow isn't sure what he expects, but this definitely isn't it. The neighborhood is a nice one, very quiet and respectable looking, and also nowhere near where Midoriya or Ida actually live. So that's why he's a little confused to find his classmates here on a school day. It takes a moment or two of searching to find them, but he eventually catches sight of Midoriya's distinctive hair on the other side of the low fence. He's not alone, either. Shadow spent enough time in class to know what the back of Ida's head looks like. He walks over, and it's something of a point of pride for him that he's trained himself to move noiselessly when he wants to. It's useful for avoiding his father's attention, and for avoiding attention in general. But Midoriya looks up and meets his eyes well before Shadow even reaches the fence. What are you doing? Shadow asks. Midoriya stares at him owlishly from where he and Ida are sitting in a patch of dirt in front of a dark hole leading under the house. I didn't think you'd actually show up, he blurts. Todoroki blinks at him, stuffing the sudden feeling of embarrassment deep down inside. Midoriya must have met the invitation as a jerk, and he'd taken it literally. Should I leave? Nah, Midoriya says. His voice is strangely quiet. Unless you want to. Just try to keep quiet, Ida adds, and it's odd to hear him talk so softly. You might scare her. He reaches into the bag sitting between him and Midoriya and tosses something under the house. Shadow's sharp ears pick up the sound of rustling from somewhere in the darkness. Curiosity overtakes him, and he carefully hops the fence and goes to sit down on Midoriya's other side. So what exactly? There's a dog, Midoriya says, gesturing vaguely to the space under the house. She was just left here. There's a note of disgust in Ida's voice. Who would do that to a dog? He shakes his head. She's apparently been here a couple weeks. The homeowners have been feeding her, but she's scared. We've been trying to get her to trust us, Midoriya says. She's a lot closer than she was 2 hours ago. Shadow cranes his neck and catches sight of what looks like a dirty pile of fur, just barely visible in the dark, about 3 feet in. Why not go in after it? It might startle the dog, Ida says. She's not very big, but she can still bite. Oh. Shadow hesitates and eyes the bag of dog treats. Can I try? They sit there for another 20 minutes before the dog finally wanders within reach. It's Ida who reaches in first, muttering, "Good dog, please don't bite me," before gently brushing his fingers along the dog's muzzle. It pulls away at first, but another treat calms it, and it lets Ida touch it again. Finally, it crawls out of the darkness and approaches them, tail between its legs. It's a fluffy little white spitz, or at least it was at one point. It's now a mess of matted, dirty, probably flea-infested fur, and when Midoriya gingerly coaxes its head through a loot leash, it shivers. It's another 10 minutes before it finally relaxes enough to lie down and eat another treat. "I know a rescue that can take her," Midoriya says. "They'll take care of her, clean her up and have a vet look at her and stuff." "How often do you do this?" Shadow asks. "Do what?" "This specifically, or?" Ida gives him a quizzical look. "What do you mean?" "I mean, sometimes," Midoriya says. "It's not always this, but it is sometimes. It's just favors, I guess." "To anyone in particular?" Ida asks. "Not really. Just anyone who asks. Sometimes animals are involved. More often than I'd like." Shadow blinks at him, mildly baffled. They take the dog out of the yard and out to the sidewalk. "Well, I was happy to help," Ida says. "Even though, to be honest, Midoriya, I'm not sure you really needed me. If you've done this before, then you probably had this well in hand." "Oh, I did," Midoriya replies. "Then why?" "Sometimes everything's awful," Midoriya says, as the smudged white dog trembles at his feet. He stoops to offer another treat, and the dog takes it gently from his hand. Or it feels like it, anyway. And you think, what's the point of everything if it's just going to come back around to awful again? He runs his fingers lightly over the dog's ear. "And when that happens, when I feel like that, I just find something useful to do. Something that helps someone and doesn't have anything to do with what upset me. Doesn't matter who, doesn't matter why. If I can do it, then anyone can do it, and anyone will do it." He shrugs. "I dunno. I guess it just reminds me that if I can do things that matter to someone, then maybe everything doesn't have to be hopeless bullshit." Ida blinks in surprise, but Shadow has already heard Midoriya curse before. "It still feels like it," Ida says quietly. "I know," Midoriya says. "I don't know if that goes away." "It doesn't," Shadow says bluntly. He knows it doesn't, because he's still waiting. "I was just trying to help," Midoriya says. "It helps me to be helpful, sometimes. I don't know if you're the same, but I thought it was worth a try." To be honest, I'm not sure if it worked, either," Ida admits. "But, thank you, Midoriya. For trying." "You're welcome." Midoriya stands up and dusts himself off, or tries to. "It's just you can't fix everything, but just because things are awful doesn't mean you can't do something about them." For a moment, there's a steely glint in Ida's eyes, but it's gone in the next. "I suppose you're right," he says. He checks his phone. I should head home. My parents will be worrying." "All right," Midoriya says. "See you tomorrow, Ida." Shadow watches his classmate go, only to glance over at Midoriya when the ladder starts bouncing a little on the balls of his feet. "I'm worried about him," Midoriya says. "I hope he talks to someone. Doesn't have to be me, just someone." "Do you always drag people's problems out into the open?" Shadow asks, because he never did get a straight answer when he tried asking Bakugo. "I'm nosy, sneaky, and I can't mind my own business," Midoriya replies. "That's probably why you got 3 votes in the class election," Shadow tells him. Midoriya blinks and stares at him for a moment, and Shadow shrugs. He's glad he voted for Yaoyorozu, but if he had known what kind of person Midoriya was at the time, it might have at least taken him longer to decide. "After you deal with the dog, would you be up for a spa?" Midoriya takes a deep breath and lets it out slowly. "You know what?" "Yes. Yes, I am. You can learn a lot about a person just from their fighting style. For example, he learns that day that when Midoriya calls himself sneaky, he means it." Chapter 20. Lunch with Uraraka and Ida the next day is a quiet affair. Usually they are animated, with Uraraka and Izuku competing to see who can dominate the conversation with chatter interspersed with Ida's booming voice and vigorous gesturing. But now their little group is a muted pocket in the midst of the cafeteria's general buzz of activity. It's not an uncomfortable atmosphere, but it is a somber one. Uraraka's finally stopped looking like she desperately wants to say something but can't think of what. Ida, ironically, is doing most of the talking. The main reason why they are totally silent is that he's making calm small talk, safe, day-to-day topics like school work and class schedules and training. Izuku, for his part, is just trying not to stare at Tensei too much while he worries about things. Rei's taken a liking to him, but Izuku can't bring himself to enjoy the sight of her scampering around at his heels or hanging off his shoulders like a monkey. There's far too much on his mind. He has a message to deliver and no idea how to do so. There's a hero killer on the loose. His friend is sad and it's going to take more than a pep talk and a dirty dog to make things better. He has a short list of hero agencies to choose from and only a few days to make his decision, and Miss Shimoa's promised Grand Torina is not on that list. Be patient, Miss Shimoa has told him. You grabbed his attention. He's just taking a while because he's making it out to be more complicated than it is. He'll probably send his nomination in a little late. There's only a few days before the deadline for his decision, and Izuku isn't sure how long he can afford to wait. Eventually, even Ida runs out of topics and the table lapses into silence. It's only a brief one, but Izuku sees the way Ida's hands curl and uncurl in his lap. I do apologize, Ida says. I've been out of sorts, and if I'm making things awkward. Of course you're not. Uraraka cuts him off. And Ida, even if you were, it's not your fault. Thank you, Uraraka, but even still. Ida's knuckles are nearly white. In spite of everything, I still have responsibilities, and obligations that I mustn't let fall to the wayside. No one's expecting you to snap back to normal, Izuku says, with a quick glance at Tensei. Ida, you lost someone important. Yeah, Uraraka says softly. I don't have any siblings, so I don't know what that's like, but you know it's okay to not be okay, right? She tries a smile, and it comes out a little wobbly. I mean, I know you have engines in your legs, but you're not a robot. Ida manages a smile of his own at that. I suppose not, he leans his chin on his palm, and his eyes lose a bit of their focus. It's just that there's this one thing, and it's such a penny thing, but it bothers me. Just thinking about it makes me feel ill, but... What is it? Izuku asks cautiously. Tensei looks up from where Rei is eagerly showing him how to fingerspell. It feels like the end of an era, Ida replies. And I know he wasn't top-ranked, he was no All Might or Endeavor or Best Genist, but it bothers me to see the sun rise and everyone go on with their lives, even though the hero and genium is gone. It's over. Uraraka makes a quiet, sympathetic little noise. Izuku feels Tensei's eyes on him and sees an opportunity to fulfill an obligation. He hesitates for a moment. He knows he's treading on treacherous ground here. He knows that one verbal misstep will make him look foolish at best and horribly disrespectful at worst. So he hesitates, cuddling his brain for the right words. Well, maybe it doesn't have to be, he says at last. Ida looks up at him, and the fog in his eyes clears and sharpens. What? Izuku swallows the urge to backtrack, because he did make a promise and is not likely to have an opening like this again anytime soon. I mean, he takes a deep breath, shoots one last glance at Tensei, and takes the plunge. You're his little brother, aren't you? And you haven't really picked a hero name. He sees Ida's face and bearing change, shifting from worry confusion to white-knuckled comprehension. His nerve nearly fails him then and there, but it's too late to backpedal now. I just think, if anyone has a right to carry that torch, it's you. The pounding of his pulse in his ears is almost deafening. Ida gapes at him, rigid with shock, unaware of the way his older brother is watching him intently. It's just a thought, Izuku says quietly, which isn't quite the same as backpedaling. I think if you don't want that to die, then that part, at least, that one thing, you can still protect that. I'm not sure that's true. Ida's nearly whispering, which is something Izuku has never heard him do before. It's what he'd want, Izuku wants to say, but he doesn't. He has no right to say that, as far as Ida knows. And Izuku doubts that there will ever be a right time to tell Ida the truth, but it certainly wouldn't be here and now. Just think about it, he murmurs and says no more on the subject. Ida gives him a curt nod and nothing more. True to Ms. Shimura's prediction, Gran Torino's nomination comes through at the very last minute. Izuku finds out when All Might pulls him aside for a conversation on the subject, looking like someone just walked over his grave. Ms. Shimura, as close to his side as always, looks like she's not sure whether to give him a hug or burst out laughing. "Sorry, Beansprout, I didn't think he'd take it quite like that," she says, a little shamefaced. "But I guess, considering how things went, I shouldn't really be that surprised." "His name is Gran Torino," All Might says, and there's a strange tension in the smile on his face. He walks further down the hall from the classroom, keeping his back to Izuku. "He's taught at UA before, but only for 1 year. He was my homeroom teacher, in fact." "Wait. What?" Izuku blurts out, darting to catch up. "He taught at UA. He taught you?" He shoots a wide-eyed look at Miss Shimura, who gives him an innocent smile in return. The word she had used was friend. He'd never thought, he'd never even imagined. Well, it was hard to imagine. All Might was the greatest. The strongest hero, with no one equal to him, much less anyone better. Logically, he had to have started out as a student, but still. He knows about One for All as well, All Might continues. That's probably why he gave you that nomination. Does he not usually, take on students? Izuku asks, choosing his words carefully. Fishing for information from All Might is not something he ever could have prepared himself for. And no, All Might's hands ring at his sides. I was a special case. I think he was doing it as a favor to, well, anyway. He retired many years ago, and I haven't known him to be active otherwise. When's the last you heard from him? Izuku presses. All Might's steps go uneven for a moment, and he pauses. I can't recall. Did something? Midoriya, Miss Shimura says sharply, and Izuku's tongue locks in place. And never mind, he murmurs. All Might, fortunately, barely seems to notice anything amiss. He's still speaking, but it's as if he's talking to himself. I wonder, did he nominate you because my teaching is inadequate? There's no denying it now, he's shaking. I have to admit, the thought of him taking up his name again and nominating you is a little terrifying. He holds up a folded piece of paper, and it crinkles in his shaking hand. But in any case, while training you is my responsibility, well, you were nominated, so it's not as if any of the other agencies can show you how to use, well. You should go. Learn what you can from him. You'll do fine. I'm sure of it. Izuku takes the paper, feeling his breakfast creep back up his stomach. What kind of person is Gran Torino if just hearing from him is enough to throw All Might for a loop? Oh. And one more thing, All Might says, grasping eagerly at a chance to change the subject. Your costume. It just got back from being repaired. You can pick it up after school, you'll need it for next week's training. Izuku's heart leaps. He'd missed having it when villains attacked the USJ. It would have been nice to be able to fight in it instead of his gym clothes. He'll just have to take better care of it this time. Okay. Thanks, All Might. He hesitates. Any advice? For learning from Gran Torino. All Might's hand falls heavily on his shoulder. Izuku can feel it still shaking. Without a word, All Might squeezes his shoulder, pats it lightly, and walks off. Okay then. Taking advantage of the fact that All Might has his back to him, Izuku shoots one hand out and catches Ms. Shimura by the wrist, stopping her from following. Once All Might is out of sight, and his footsteps have faded to silence, Izuku raises his eyes to Ms. Shimura's pale face. There are things he's not ready to talk about yet, Ms. Shimura tells him quietly. Ms. Shimura, did you stop me because he's not ready to talk yet, or because you're not ready for me to know? Her face tightens. I'm going to find out, Izuku tells her. One way or another. You can't force me to put it off forever. He glares up at her, still gripping her wrist. I may not know how you fit into all of this, but I'm in this up to my neck. I can't force you to tell me anything. I can't force anyone to tell me anything. But if all you're going to do is stonewall me whenever I need answers, that's not fair. Miss Shimura can't look him in the eye for long, and soon turns her head away. You're right. You're right, I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking. What do you think is going to happen when I find out who you are? Izuku presses. Why are you so afraid of that? Because you love him, Miss Shimura blurts out. Izuku blinks. You love Toshi, she says quietly. You love him with all your heart, and I'm glad, Izuku, I'm so happy that he found you. The smile that curls at her mouth is a bitter one, there's not a drop of joy to be found in it. And that's why I know you won't forgive me when you find out what I did to him. He blinks, and suddenly he's alone in the hallway, holding on to nothing. I hate it when they do that, he says to Rei. She heaves a sigh and shrugs. He returns to the classroom without arousing anyone's curiosity. If nothing else, the tension he's felt over nominations is more or less resolved. Almost everyone has already made their choice and is happy to discuss it when there's a free moment in class. Uraraka's choice focuses on hand-to-hand combat. Ida's picking a more average agency to get a feel for the general work environment. Mineta picked Mount Lady, and Izuku isn't sure whether to pray for Mount Lady's sanity or Mineta's physical safety. Even Todoroki has come to a decision, which is frankly a miracle considering how many nominations he had to choose from. You're picking Endeavor's agency. Izuku asks, not long before the lunch bell is about to ring. You got more nominations than anyone. You could have your pick of any top agency in the city. Todoroki shrugs. I can. So I'm picking the highest one. Well, yeah, but Izuku's voice trails off. His own newly updated nomination list is in his hand, less than half a page long, unlike the veritable ream of papers in front of Todoroki. I dunno, I figured you'd have had your fill of learning from him. Maybe I feel that way, Todoroki says. But regardless of how I might personally feel, he's still the second strongest hero and the most prolific. He knows the industry forward and backward. The volume of his voice drops. He's a bastard, but he still has his uses. Millimeter, the noise Izuku makes is non-committal at best. Rei's apparently feeling mischievous because she casually blows at the list on Todoroki's desk, sending the top 2 pages flying. Seeing the prey coming, Izuku snatches them back out of the air without looking and puts them down again. Still, though. You don't have to worry about me, Todoroki says flatly. What I learned this week will have nothing to do with my father or how I feel about him. I'm not so weak-minded that I can't focus on what needs to be done. Didn't mean to imply you were, Izuku says. But for the record, Todoroki. He pauses, one finger on the stack to keep Rei from blowing it away again. Avoiding things that hurt you doesn't count as weakness. Todoroki raises an eyebrow at him. Doesn't it? Not if there's a choice. And, Izuku looks at the list. You do have loads of choices. But it's not really weakness. It's more just taking care of yourself. He shrugs, feeling awkward. I dunno. It's up to you. I just don't think you have to prove anything. I understand. And thank you for your concern. Todoroki straightens the papers, his face set. But honestly, I think this will take me where I need to go. He glances up. What about you? What about me? Do you know who you're choosing? Yeah. Izuku glances down at the page, eyeing the name at the very bottom of the list. I had one recommended to me, so that's what I'm gonna go with. It's high time he got some answers. The week of on-the-job training arrives. The class splits up at the train station, everyone laden with cases containing their hero costumes. Aizawa sends them all off, and Izuku can already feel his nose buzzing. It's not just for himself, either. He doesn't like the look on Todoroki's face, or the way his friend, Todoroki's his friend, avoids talking to anyone. He knows full well that Todoroki skimmed details when they spoke at the sports festival, and he can't help but worry about Endeavor's idea of training. And Todoroki's not the only who's quiet. Hey, Midoriya. Izuku looks up to find Tensei standing by him. Listen. I just wanted to say thanks. For being there for him. I've been worried about him lately, so... Izuku grins and signs a quick "you're welcome." He's seen Rei teaching him simple science when she gets bored during school hours. I'm still worried, Tensei says. In the past couple of days. I don't know, it's like he's got his energy back, but I don't know if it'll last. So just thanks for looking out for him. Nodding, Izuku looks past him to where Ida is already walking away. Uraraka catches on as well. Silence is hard to miss when it's coming from Ida. Hey, Ida. His friend pauses. Izuku hesitates, not quite sure what to say. Since their conversation at lunch, he hasn't mentioned Stain or Tensei once, nor has the latter left his side. Izuku would like to think that this is because Ida is grieving privately or gradually coming to terms with it, but he can't be sure. You know you can talk to us, right? He says at last, as Uraraka stands beside him and nods along. If you need to. We're your friends. We're here for you, Ida, Uraraka adds. Izuku doesn't quite see what flits across Ida's face in that moment. It passes too quickly for him to be sure whether or not he sees anything at all. But in the next moment, Ida's smiling back. Sure, he says. Thank you, both of you. As Ida turns away, Izuku considers bringing up their conversation from earlier and his suggestion on Tensei's behalf, but he decides against it. Watching Ida leave with his ghostly brother close by his side, he considers quite a few things that he doesn't go through with. If only foresight were as clear as hindsight. The train ride gives Izuku 45 minutes to stew alone in his nerves as he watches the landscape go by. Well, not quite alone. Rei distracts him by signing things she sees out the window or with silent impressions of the other passengers on the train. Izuku has to take his phone out and pretend to browse his texts to keep from looking like he's laughing at nothing. From the train station, the address takes him to a building that looks less like a hero agency and more like a condemned apartment complex. The front door has a broken neon welcome sign hanging over it, almost mockingly. Izuku isn't sure what he was expecting, but it sure as hell isn't this. He comes to a halt and casts a dubious eye over the place. He glances at Rei, who cocks her head this way and that as if the slight change in angle will reveal more information. I'll check if it's safe, she signs to him and vanishes from his side. Izuku counts in his head and makes it to 10 before she reappears, and she looks no less confused than he feels. Well, he asks. There's a man in there, she tells him. He's lying on the floor in a puddle of ketchup. Is he okay? He's completely fine and is awake. He's just lying there covered in ketchup. Izuku wishes with all his heart that Miss Shimoa were here. Then maybe he could turn to her and ask, hey, maybe what the hell? But she's not here, and this is probably all the information he's going to get, which is more information than this mysterious Gran Torino expects him to have, so there's really nothing for it. With a shrug at his friend, Izuku walks into the building. With Rei's guidance, he finds the ketchup-covered man in question. As it turns out, lying there covered in ketchup is a bit of an understatement. The floor is a mess of spilled food and shattered crockery. The trailing end of the string of sausage links that protrudes out from underneath the man has a passing resemblance to intestines. The whole scene might have made the little old man look eviscerated, if not for the fact that Izuku already knows what actual evisceration looks like. And he really is a little old man. He's a lot shorter than Izuku expected, especially if he's the Gran Torino that All Might quietly fears and that Miss Shimoa has been talking up this whole time. In fact, he's not just short, he's tiny. Izuku has more than a head and a half on him, or at least he would if he was standing up. From this distance, if Izuku squints a bit, he can see the man breathing. Hello, he starts. Are you okay? The man's head shoots up and he screams. I'm alive. Izuku startles badly enough to drop the case with his costume in it, right as Rei tries to leap into his arms. It doesn't quite work, and she ends up scrambling up onto his shoulders instead. It takes all of his self-control to stay still while she does that, while also fighting to get his heart rate back to a more reasonable level. He says as Gran Torino gets to his feet. Is this hazing? Is that what's going on? Am I being hazed? Who you? Gran Torino asks by shouting it in his face. Oh, I'm from UA, Izuku answers, relieved that maybe this is moving forward. I'm Midoriya Izuku. What? Gran Torino shouts again. Midoriya Izuku. Izuku repeats, enunciating as clearly as he can. Slowly, Rei starts climbing down off of him. You nominated me, remember? Who you? I'm Either he's talking too quietly or the man isn't paying attention because Gran Torino cuts him off with, "You know, I'm starving. I wanna eat something," and plops back down in the puddle of ketchup. Two thoughts occur to him. The first is the recollection that All Might has not seen this man in years, and a simple logical leap takes him to the fact that if All Might hasn't seen him, then Miss Shimoa hasn't, either. The second is, oh God help him, the man is senile. It's not as much of a shock as it could be. Miss Shimoa did imply that he was getting on in years, and if she hasn't seen him in a long time, then there's probably a lot that she doesn't know about him. Well, okay, Izuku says. Senile doesn't mean wrong, nor does it mean useless, it just means he needs a little more creativity and patience than he would have predicted. That's fine, but I was actually hoping you could help me. Do you remember nominating me, at least? The old man looks him in the eye, frowning as if trying to recall a name. And then he does recall a name, that is. It isn't the correct one, but Izuku can't find it in himself to complain because the name he says is Toshinori. Izuku goes still and silent. So this is the student that Nana's little golden boy has taken a shine to. He ain't much to look at if Gran Torino is any judge. But then, neither was Toshinori when he first laid eyes on the brat. Of course, even Toshinori was taller than this one. This kid looks soft and doe-eyed, and a drunk monkey could tie a necktie better than that. But mostly he looks like he hasn't had a proper sleep in at least a week. On the other hand, there is something to him, something besides the scar on his face and the weird way that the light hits his eyes in the dimness. It's the sort of something that he wouldn't have expected Toshinori to pick up on, because it isn't the same blinding brightness that Toshinori himself practically sweats. No, this particular ankle biter has something different. Maybe it's the fact that he barely blinked at Torino's little prank, which could just mean he's dense, or it could mean he's too sharp to be fooled by a ketchup puddle and a few sausage links. Well, either way, he can work with that. The senile act has thrown this kid off balance already, not as much as he'd like, though, so he throws out Toshinori's name, just to gauge his reaction. He expects confusion, or at least for the kid to write it off as the dementia talking. But instead the kid freezes and his eyes lose that glazed look of patient confusion. He blinks, and for a split second he looks like he's seen or heard a ghost. Toshi, the kid echoes and steps forward with a sharp look in his eye like Gran Torino holds all the answers to his questions, which, let's face it, he probably does. Is that his name? Is that All Might's name? Gran Torino blinks and the boy steps forward again. I have questions for you, he says. Lots of them. And someone, well, I've been told you can help me. With my power. Now they are getting somewhere. He could still use a little more information on this kid, though after decades of radio silence from Nana's brat, he figured asking Toshinori himself was probably a no-go. Torino watches the boy out of the corner of his eye, pretending to ignore him as he turns to the case that the kid dropped earlier. Casually he opens it and finds a neatly folded green jumpsuit inside. This is his hero costume from the looks of it. One for all, he cackles and sees the boy's eyes light up almost literally. I'd like to see how well you can handle it. The eagerness dims then, and if Torino were any judge he'd say the kid was shrinking back a little. Well. You got a nice costume here, Torino continues, and he does, just judging by a cursory glance. Not too bad, for a Mark 1. So why don't you put it on and come at me? Before the kid can answer, Torino barks out another, who are you, because it is damn funny to see him jump. I can't control it yet, the kid answers, and there's an edge to his voice. Oh ho, he's starting to try the brat's patience now. That's why I came. I need to learn how to deal with these powers, because All Might doesn't have much time left. His hands curl into fists. Torino can see scars on the right one. Can you help me? Torino keeps quiet just long enough to let the boy squirm a little. Then he moves. His quirk's just like riding a bike, really. He's not one to let excess fat grow on his bones, but he imagines that even if he went years without using his power, it would still come back to him like an old friend. In the blink of an eye, he ricochets off the ceiling, walls, and floor, so he's showing off a little, sue him, and ends up staring down into Midoriya Izuku's shocked eyes. There's a grin that Torino can't keep off his face, and he tosses the facade to the side because they are in business. Remains to be seen, he says, and commits the dumbstruck look on the kid's face to memory, just in case he ever needs a private chuckle. Can't help YA if I've got nothing useful to work with. Think you're big, kid. You barely a twinkle in your mother's eye. Now, if you meant all those pretty words, then get over here and come at me. The boy blinks and his eyes flicker to the side. A ruse, he says, like he's talking to himself. What is it with teachers and logical ruses? Would it kill them to just say what they mean? So, he's not just a brat, he's a mouthy brat. In a heartbeat, Torino knocks him off his feet and makes it up to the opposite wall. I said my bit already, boy, he says. You want to learn a thing or two, or you all talk. When the boy's eyes meet his, they are shining with eagerness, lingering confusion, and just a little bit of relief. Those are busy eyes. He looks like he's not sure what to think, and that suits Torino just fine. Better to keep him guessing. Just for a moment, there's an almost knowing look in those eyes, like the brat's got some private joke that he's not about to share. I still have questions for you, he says. That's nice, boy, Torino replies. Tell why what? I'll give Emma listen once you prove to me your worth was 10 and my breath on answers. Fair enough, the brat says, as his eyes search Torino's face as if he can find his answers written in the wrinkles. And then he smiles. Gran Torino takes that smile and locks it away for later, for any future moments where he needs to remind himself that this wide-eyed, wet behind the ears Ricky isn't another Toshinori. Cause Nana's Brett smiles a hell of a lot, but he ain't hardly ever smiled like that. Toshinori's smile is mask and a symbol, an inseparable part of what makes All Might, All Might. He puts his smile on like it's part of his costume. This kid brandishes it like a weapon. Chapter 22. Izuku would be lying if he said he wasn't unsure of himself, with Rei gone. She's always been by his side whenever he's in a pinch, but now she's vanished. There are other ghosts here too, but none of them are her. And besides, in a close alley like this, they could end up being a disadvantage. It's crowded for Izuku, but not for Stain. Midoriya. Ida's voice is quiet, but it still sends a jolt of anger and hurt spiking through Izuku until his fists clench. Later, he thinks. Deal with that later. Out loud he says, don't get in the way. It probably hurts Ida to hear him say that, but Izuku's eyes are on the dead. The spectral forms shift and the 18 ghosts move to give him room. Before Stain makes a move, Izuku calls one for all into his body and launches himself forward. Full cowl. It's nice to have a proper attack now, one that he can use freely. Stain's blade flashes out and Izuku ducks beneath it. Don't get cut. One cut and it's over. Speed is key here. For all his talk, he knows that simply stonewalling Stain won't work. He's no All Might, he can't shut down attacks with raw power. No, if he's going to get himself, Ida, and the injured hero through this alive, then he has to be fast enough and smart enough. Watch your left arm, the hero with the slashed throat warns. Izuku jerks his arm away and twists, narrowly avoiding a cut. His teeth clench in a tense grin. Having 18 spectators on his side doesn't hurt. Stain is fast, and it's all Izuku can do to keep up. But that's all right, isn't it? It's not like he expects to take down the hero killer himself. He just needs to keep up, keep his attention, and keep from getting cut long enough for help to arrive. Someone has to come. Stain's blade hums dangerously close to his face again, and Izuku dodges it. But it's a feint. While Izuku is busy worrying about the blades, Stain lashes out with his free hand and slams Izuku face first into the alley wall. Stars explode in his vision, and Izuku shoves off the wall and blinks them away just in time to see Stain lunging for Ida again. No. It's a stupid move, what he does next. He keeps low and dives between Stain's legs, ready to get between him and Ida again if that's what it takes. Skidding to a halt, he whips back around and braces himself for Stain's attack. Only Stain isn't attacking. In the time it takes for Izuku to turn and face him, Stain has returned to the very spot where Izuku was standing just seconds before. The hero killer reaches out, fingertips brushing the wall. Shit, Midoriya, stop him. It's Tensei who cries out, galvanizing Izuku into a desperate lunge before he even knows what he needs to stop Stain from doing. His mid-step, his balance off, when his limbs suddenly lock. It's only then that he registers the warm trickle down his face. He'd blooded his nose against the wall. A split second before Izuku hits the ground, he sees Stain finish licking blood from his fingers. Petrified, he rolls over from his own momentum until he's crumpled on his side, looking back at Ida with wide eyes. No. No, Tensei echoes his thoughts in a small voice. A shadow falls across him. Stain steps over him, smooth and nonchalant as a cat. Izuku strains against his invisible bonds, but his body won't respond. Stop. He can still speak, for all the good that does. Stain, don't. This won't prove anything, you can't. So hasty, Stain says. That's your trouble. If you'd only slowed down, you would have found them peacefully. He glances over his shoulder and meets Izuku's eyes briefly. Now you get to watch. Don't. His voice shakes. He's never done this before, never watched a ghost be made. He doesn't want to see that. He doesn't want to see Ida like that, not yet, not ever. He won't prove anything. We are not even heroes, not yet. Midoriya, stop, Ida grits out. Casualties in every war, Stain says grimly. That is the way of the world. It's for the best. Better to end such a tainted dream before it can be fulfilled. Ida, move. Izuku feels tears coming again, burning their way out of his eyes. You have to move, there has to be a limit to his quirk, you have to try. The blade thrusts downward. Izuku hears Tensei scream. And then the alley lights up, red gold and blinding. When Izuku's sight comes back to him and the colored spots have faded from his vision, the fire has driven Stain away from Ida before his blade could touch him. Rei is crouching over Izuku, her hair brushing against his face. At the mouth of the alley, flames trail from Todoroki's outstretched fingertips, while ice forms on the right side of his face. His eyes are on Stain, flickering briefly to Izuku. There's something in them that Izuku hasn't seen before, something very close to fear. In spite of that, his voice is steady, casual, even. You couldn't have been more specific. Sorry, Rei adds. He took too long. I made him hurry. Todoroki. Ida gapes at their classmate. What, how? Midoriya, Ida, Todoroki says quietly, stepping further into the alley. Are you injured? No, Ida sounds reluctant. But we can't move. It's his quirk, Izuku answers through grinding teeth. If he swallows your blood, it paralyzes you. Don't let him cut you. Todoroki nods. Noted. His right hand sweeps forward, and a wave of ice ripples across the pavement. Izuku doesn't relax, far from it. But something in his chest settles. Todoroki stands a far better chance of evading Stain's power than he does. It's not just that he's objectively a better fighter, he's a long-range fighter, and he can keep Stain at bay with fire and ice without risking getting cut. With that settled, Izuku focuses on trying to move again. No quirk is the end-all be-all. There's always a limit, always a downside, always a weakness or an opening somewhere. Rei, ever helpful, give him a sharp slap to the back of the head, but no. It's not like Shinse's quirk. A time limit, maybe. Stain is fast, much faster than Izuku was when he was fighting Todoroki. He's swift and well-armed, with 18 murdered heroes to speak for his skill in a fight. Todoroki's quirk is powerful, but lopsided. He isn't used to his fire, and in a narrow space like this, he can't brute force his way to victory without risking the safety of everyone else here. Izuku grinds his teeth until his head hurts as he watches Stain dodge another focused barrage of ice. He hasn't even broken a bone yet, and is already a liability right out of the gate. Splintering ice coupled with the heat from Todoroki's left side throw up a mist, and for a moment Izuku's view of the fight is hazy, and so is Shouder's. Rei shrieks in fury, and one of the dead heroes cries out. He's going for his knives. Kid, warn your friend. Izuku's heart goes to this throat, and it's a miracle he manages to speak through it. Todoroki, he is throwing knives, he yells. He's a second too late, two knives come sailing through the settling mist, just as Todoroki responds to his warning. A wide pillar of ice bursts from the ground at his feet, catching one of the knives before it can reach him. The other clatters to the ground behind him, and the alley echoes with Todoroki's cry of pain. Izuku's heart lurches. Blood trickles down Todoroki's right arm, and he clutches at the wound with his left. No. Ida's not far from where Izuku lies, straining against the paralysis. Damn it, his eyes are wild and desperate as they turn to Izuku. Why did you call him here? He hisses through clenched teeth. Ida. The black anger rises in his chest, making his voice shake. He knows, and he didn't mean for this to happen. He didn't mean for Todoroki to come alone. That was why he sent the message to everyone. No one else was supposed to get involved. No one else was. Don't let him near the knife. Izuku yells, forcing his attention back to Todoroki. No. Todoroki grits his teeth. He can't even stop to bind his wound, because Stain doesn't give him that chance. In the next moment he moves, though not toward Todoroki. Stain's eyes are fixed on Izuku as he lunges, blade raised. He's already close. Izuku and Ida are further into the alley, while Todoroki stands at its entrance. As the hero killer flies toward him, Izuku's brain makes a few rapid-fire observations. Stain is much closer to him than Todoroki is. Todoroki isn't used to his fire yet, especially in an enclosed space like this. With his right unwinded, his aim with ice might be off, and he can't direct it with his foot without hurting Izuku. A long-range attack isn't going to save him. Izuku sees ice forming at Todoroki's right foot, not to attack but to propel, and he sees both Todoroki's intentions and Stain's plan. Stain pulled the same thing with him, didn't he? Don't, he yells, desperately. It's a trap, he's drawing you in. But he can't know whether or not it's a bluff, and neither can Todoroki. He can't know that Stain won't follow through if Todoroki doesn't give him what he wants. Todoroki launches himself into the alley, fire already blazing at his left arm. Stain is fast, but Todoroki is faster, and the hero killer is forced to leave off attacking Izuku to defend himself. The flames turn Izuku's vision to colored spots again, and when they die down, Stain is nowhere near him. Knife, Izuku wants, and Todoroki is already racing back toward the mouth of the alley. Stain gets there first, snatching the blooded knife off the ground. His tongue flicks out. Todoroki falls, limbs locked in place, a few feet from where Stain stands. Ida's wordless cry sends needles into Izuku's heart. Todoroki, was it? Stain's voice is as slick as oil. Ah, you must be Endeavor's boy. Todoroki spits a curse. Now this is a privilege. Izuku feels his spine go taut. Like begets like, after all, Stain says. Perhaps this is good practice, for when I can finally destroy your bastard father. The blade at his side twitches and begins to lift. Izuku sees Todoroki limp and bloody and still, Todoroki faded and spectral with wide eyes, a corpse on the ground, ghost number 19. Izuku called for help and he came running. The paralysis shatters like glass and Izuku launches himself through the air. It's a perfectly straight line, from the ground to Stain, and Izuku never thought that impact could feel so right, but there's a grim satisfaction in how he slams shoulder first into Stain's gut that he'll maybe stop to worry about later. The angle of it sends Stain slamming into the wall by the mouth of the alley, and as Izuku crouches over Todoroki he feels his eyes burn. You okay? He keeps his eyes fixed on Stain as the latter gets back to his feet. Fine. Is Todoroki staring at him? Izuku's eyes are on Stain, but he can feel Todoroki staring at him. How'd you break free? Good question. It can't be his own desperation or anger that let him break free, as much as Izuku would like to think so. If it had been that simple, then he would have broken free when Stain threatened Ida. Look out! The cry comes from someone. Ida, Tenya or Tensei, Izuku isn't sure, or one of the crowd of watching ghosts. He sees Stain hurtling toward them again and doesn't stop to think. Calling on one for all, he grabs Todoroki by the back of his combat vest and launches both of them out of the way of Stain's attack. Sorry, he mutters, teeth gritted. His own pulse is deafening. I'm sorry. I thought more people would show up, or that they wouldn't come alone. Not your fault, Todoroki replies. In spite of the dire situation, he sounds almost sheepish. I might have panicked a little. I'm usually better about that. Still don't know how I got free, Izuku murmurs. Ida and that other hero were frozen before I got here. Can't be a time limit. I don't think I did anything. It all comes down to luck, doesn't it? Stain drawls. The end of his blade scrapes against the wall. It's rarely character or actual worth. It all comes down to luck. Luck of birth. Of parentage. He spits the last word with a poisonous glare at Todoroki. Todoroki's anger takes the form of a sharp hiss of breath. Izuku's jaw clenches until it creaks, and only out of habit does he force the corners of his mouth upward before turning his bared teeth back to Stain. He remembers Okamura, twisted and contorted beyond any semblance of humanity, blaming Todoroki for endeavor just like this murderer is doing. He feels fire in his eyes and steel in his heart, feels his veins flood with ice water as he smiles at Stain with white teeth. The blade hums and Izuku ducks beneath it a split second before slamming elbow first into Stain's ribs. He tries not to feel too satisfied at the quiet retching noise. He follows it up with another blow in the same spot, not wanting to give Stain the time to recover and react. The hero killer falls back, rolling with impact until he lands in a crouch. He flings a knife, which Izuku dodges easily, only for Stain to charge again while he's off balance. Jump! At the sound of Todoroki's voice, Izuku doesn't think, he just does. One for all launches him upward, just as ice bursts forth in a wave beneath him. Stain barely gets out of the way in time. Springboarding off the walls, Izuku manages to land further back, closer to where Ida and Todoroki lie. Except Todoroki is on his feet now, hand outstretched, no longer paralyzed. Izuku blinks at him, astonished, and the look Todoroki gives him is equally nonplussed. Did you do something? Izuku asks as he turns back to Stain. No. The paralysis lifted on its own, I'm sure of it. Todoroki stands by him, still bleeding from his arm. Izuku finds himself breathing easier. I was the first to be paralyzed, a new voice speaks up. It's the still living hero, Stain's original victim, sitting slumped against the wall. I still can't move. What do we have in common, then? Izuku asks, half to himself. What makes us different from them? Todoroki sends ice rippling toward Stain again, keeping him at bay while they regroup. Izuku racks his brain, quirk type. Physical condition. Amount of blood ingested when Todoroki's left hand closes on his arm. Midoriya, he says. What's your blood type? Blood type. I'm type O, Izuku says. You? Same. Todoroki turns his head. Ida. I'm type A, Ida answers. I'm B, the injured hero says. Might be it, then. Izuku purses his lips thoughtfully. Doesn't help us much, though. Clever you. Stain's chuckle rings out. You have it right, blood type affects how long my quirk holds you in place. Not that it'll do you much good. In spite of Stain's menace, Izuku stands unshaken, shoulder to shoulder with Todoroki. They haven't fought on the same side since the USJ, and this is no army of thugs or hulking Numu or menacing pale man who destroys with a touch and adorns himself with severed hands. This is one man, and the two of them are standing between him and two murders. How's your own? Izuku asks. I'll live, Todoroki replies. But I can't risk getting too close. And I can't fight long range without breaking fingers, Izuku says. So it works out. His eyes narrow. If I keep him off you, can you cover me from a distance? Beside him, Todoroki nods. I've got your back. That's a first. Izuku can't think of any living person who's ever said that to him before. He steels himself, letting one for all course through him. I shouldn't talk like this, but I don't know if we can beat him ourselves. Todoroki is quiet for a moment. Probably not, he says at last, and something in his tone makes Izuku turn, to find his mouth crooking upward in a wry smile. But we can at least make it look cool. In spite of himself, Izuku laughs. You shouldn't be here, Ida hisses at them through gritted teeth. Just to stop this, I don't want you both injured. We can still move, Todoroki replies. But give it a rest, Ida. Izuku launches himself forward. His first strike is a feint, and when Stain moves to cut him again, Izuku slams his fist into his ribs again. He hears Stain's grunt of pain, feels something, maybe bone, maybe cartilage, give, only slightly, beneath his fist. He isn't quite sure, exactly, when his brain makes the switch from by time to take him down. Maybe enough time has passed that he can safely assume that they are on their own from here. Maybe Todoroki having his back is giving him a borderline idiotic boost in courage. Maybe Ida still won't shut up and stop trying to convince them to leave, and this is Ida's fault for going off alone and Izuku's fault for not paying more attention when Ida still needed help, and Stain's fault for killing Tensei and 17 other people who were just doing their jobs. Maybe it's because there are nighting ghosts in this alleyway and Izuku came within a hair's breadth of seeing Ida and Todoroki join them. Maybe he's just angry. One of Stain's smaller knives grazes his face as it zips past him. Izuku hears it hit the ground, hears Todoroki bury it in ice to keep Stain from getting to it. One blood trickles into his mouth and Izuku barely suppresses the urge to spit it out. Somewhere behind him, Ida's voice reaches him, "Stop this, leave me, I don't want you two bleeding for me." Izuku swallows liquid iron. It's a little late for that, he thinks. Maybe it slips out of his mouth, too. He's not really keeping track. Stain launches himself past Izuku, dodging a blast of ice from Todoroki, and Izuku's body turns and carries him in pursuit before his mind has the chance to make a decision. Stain is fast, but One for All makes Izuku faster, and he reaches Todoroki just as Stain lunges in again, tongue flicking out in anticipation, eyes fixed on Todoroki's bleeding arm. Enough of the tongue is outside of Stain's mouth for Izuku to reach out and grab it. The noise that Stain makes is almost comical, and too much time exposed to open air makes his tongue tacky instead of slick. The hero killer pulls back, just as Izuku strikes him in the chin. Stain chokes, and later Izuku was swallowed down the urge to vomit when he realizes that if his punch had been any more direct, he might have guillotined his tongue right off. As it is, the hero killer stumbles back, bleeding from the mouth, and gives Izuku a look that is downright murderous. He'd hinted before that he thought Izuku was worth keeping alive. Izuku wonders if this little stunt is enough to change his mind. Nice shot. Holy shit, kid. I could have thought of that. And yet here you are. Stain is already coming at him again, and Izuku charges to meet him when Ida's voice cuts through the cheers of the dead, racked with guilt and anger. Midoriya, stop, he'll kill you. Then stand up. And Izuku is confused for a moment, because that sounds like something he'd want to say, but is hearing it in Todoroki's voice. He's thrown by anger, by fear, by how close his friends have come to dying already, enough for Stain to slice him again. The blade bites into his side, and he lunges recklessly in an attempt to grab for it, but his blood is already on Stain's winded tongue. He falls petrified to his knees. Stupid, stupid. If there's something you want to do, then do it. Todoroki's voice echoes off the alley walls. Don't waste your breath yelling at us. Stain moves like lightning, ignoring Izuku to make a run for his friends again. Todoroki, I'm sorry. Idiot, you were supposed to keep him away from them. Stain's quirk brings him down to a kneeling position this time, and he strains against it. It won't be long. He'll be free soon. The only thing between Todoroki and the hero killer is a wall of ice and Ray. His friend claws at Stain, face twisting and contorting with rage, but Stain isn't Kirishima. If he feels the concentrated terror that hovers around Ray like a fog, he doesn't show it. Flames burst forth from the ice wall, driving Stain back, but it's only a temporary fix. Mist and steam make it hard to see as Stain attacks again, heedless of flames and injuries and screaming little girl ghosts. And then, a blur of white and silver. Stain is fast and Izuku with One for All is faster, but speed is what Ida was born for. The ice wall is gone, but Ida is on his feet, glasses askew and engine sputtering but once more perfectly ambulated. Relief swells within Izuku's chest, threatening to burst, and his eyes sting until he has to blink hard just to see again. Stain recovers from the blow before Ida recovers from his damaged engines, or before Todoroki recovers from the strain of using his quirk. Knives, damn it, how many knives does Stain have are in Stain's hands and then leaving his hands before Izuku has the chance to shout a warning. Todoroki has no time to dodge, but Ida is fast. The first knife takes Ida through the arm that he raises to shield Todoroki, puncturing through his costume. The second pierces his hand, sending him to his knees. Izuku's stomach turns at Ida's pained cry, and the look on Todoroki's face burns itself into his memory. Stain's quirk releases him, and Izuku throws himself back into the fight. The ghosts are silent now. Watching. Waiting. Todoroki has left him plenty of ice to gain the high ground. Can he make it? He can't afford to doubt. Izuku launches himself upward, just as Stain makes one more pounce toward his friends. He doesn't even see Ida move. One moment his friend is standing by Todoroki, and the next, they're meeting in midair with Stain between them. Pain shoots through his arm as his fist meets Stain's face, but not the blinding inferno of a shattered arm. He's pretty sure Ida manages to get a second kick in before they hit the top of the ice ramp that Todoroki sends up to catch them. Izuku lands awkwardly on top of his injured arm, and he and Ida slide and tumble their way to the ground just behind where Todoroki stands. Stain lies still and silent on the ice, as limp as a broken doll. The three of them, four, with the injured hero still paralyzed against the wall, wait on bated breath, but the hero killer is down for the count. Cold, small hands bring Izuku back to something resembling alertness, and with Rei hovering by his side he climbs back to his feet, and oh dear, that doesn't feel very good at all. Limping and stumbling on uneven, half-frozen ground, Izuku makes his way back toward the motionless villain. Midoriya, he hears Ida say, distantly in the background, but he ignores him as he approaches Stain's side. He's muttering again, probably swearing a little, too, as he sets about relieving Stain of his knives. Within moments, he isn't alone. Todoroki joins him on one side, and on the other, the injured hero. Now that Izuku has a chance to really look at him and think, he recognizes the hero native, removes a few hidden blades from places Izuku wouldn't have thought to check. They find some cords at a nearby trash heap, and before Izuku knows it, they are dragging the unconscious hero killer out of the alley. Well, Todoroki's doing the dragging. Ida's arms are a mess, and Izuku apparently looked unsteady enough that native insists on carrying him out. He tries to look at Ida. He really does. But it still hurts to look at him, especially with Tensei hovering over him anxiously. He'll look at Ida again when he stops seeing visions of his corpse and his ghost behind his eyelids. Ida. His voice is hoarse and dry. Is it true, what he said? About what I told you? He almost can't force the words out. About being helpful. Ida's silence tells him all he needs to know. They belly out in the open for half a minute when a familiar diminutive figure emerges from another cross street, and the twisting knot in Izuku's heart, when did that get there, starts to loosen. What the hell are you doing here? Gran Torino demands, and the next Izuku knows, the old man's foot is colliding with his face. It's a gentle tap, by Torino's standards. I thought I told you to stay put, you wet behind these brat. How much were you actually banking on me staying in that train, slips out before Izuku's adrenaline-addled brain can think better of it. Torino looks as if he'd like to kick him again, but Izuku looks half-dead and native looks faintly alarmed, so he sighs. Well, you're still alive at least, he grumbles. For what it's worth, I'm glad. Other heroes arrived then, and it seems Izuku's message wasn't as useless as he'd thought. Todoroki had alerted Endeavor, who'd send other heroes on while he kept fighting those Numa creatures. At this point, Izuku has recovered enough for Native to let him down, though Rei clings to his arm like she's afraid he'll topple over if she doesn't. We're alive, he realizes, a little belatedly. He lists dizzily, but manages to catch himself on Rei before he falls. Why both? Ida's voice makes both him and Todoroki turn. His friend has hung back, still battered and quiet. Izuku watches, and his vision goes from living, breathing Ida to dead pale white eyes Ida whenever he blinks. You both were injured because of me, he says, and his wounds make his bow of apology awkward and stiff. He's not so bent that Izuku can't see tears dripping from his eyes. His eyes, they aren't blank white, not yet, not today. I was so blinded, and because of that, you too, his voice trails off. Izuku's throat is thick with pain. I tried to help, and it wasn't enough. I made things worse. He didn't listen. I tried so hard, and I couldn't stop it. Pull yourself together. The words are blunt, but Todoroki's voice is not unkind when he says them. You're the class president, remember? Ida wipes his eyes hurriedly and looks to Izuku. Midoriya. I want you to know that. Ida. His own voice sounds far away to him, like he's listening to himself from the end of the long tunnel. There's a wave of something coming, something bad and rotten, something that feels like drowning and live burial, but he can't yet. Not yet. Later, but not yet. I'm glad you're alive. I'm glad I was fast enough. But he can't tell of his crying, only that his eyes hurt and he can't look at Ida for very long. Midoriya. I need you to just not talk to me. Just for a little while. Okay. Izuku can't lift his eyes again, and that makes him a coward, but he can't look at his friend's face after saying that. Just give me a minute. Or 2. Or 10. Ida doesn't reply, and Izuku stares at the ground and tries not to think about dead things. He doesn't try hard enough. Look out. The call comes from Gran Torino, and Izuku looks to him, bewildered, then to Stain, but no, Stain's still unconscious, so why? And then there are claws digging into his back, and Izuku watches in blank bewilderment as the ground and all the people standing on it fall away to the sound of beating wings. He hears someone shout Numa before he turns his head to find talons clutching him as the wind creature carries him further into the air. Oh, he thinks. Those weren't the last words I was going for. Rei rushes up after him, but as she draws close, Izuku sees her falter, screaming in confusion and terror. She won't come near the Numa, he realizes vaguely. He didn't think anything could frighten Rei, but maybe they finally found something that spooks her. As quickly as it starts, it's over, the claws release him, and before Izuku has the chance to panic, someone catches him around the middle and carries him the rest of the way to the ground. There's a thank you on the tip of his tongue, but... all these useless fucking phonies, Stain hisses, dropping Izuku none too gently to the ground. And these criminals who spread their filth like rats. The Numu is dead on the ground with one of Stain's knives, motherfucker, in its brain, and 17 dead heroes surround him. That's why my purge is necessary. For the sake of a just world. He shoves Izuku into the ground. You, though. You're worth more alive. I am not affiliated with you. It's hard to say with his face pressed to the pavement. Izuku is about 85% sure he manages it. Shouting reaches his ears, Endeavor is here, finally, damn it, what took him so long? Stain releases him and rises, and Izuku shoves himself up to a crouch, tense and ready for round 2 even though he has never felt less ready for round 2 in his life. Stain stands up, and all other thoughts flee from Izuku's mind. Another phony, Stain snarls, and that's when words stop translating themselves to meaning in Izuku's brain. This close to Stain, he feels it sharp and raw in his mind, in his heart, in the pit of his stomach. For a split second the distilled terror floods him, and it takes a moment for his mind to reboot itself back to somewhere in the area of functioning. Stringy dark hair falls into his vision, and that's Rei, crouching over him, eyes black, teeth bared. It feels like her. Like the fear that surrounds Rei in a noxious cloud. Or the choking dread that surrounded Okamura before Izuku managed to talk him down. He can see Okamura now, and Hina, still following Endeavor. There are so many ghosts here, and they are the only ones not frozen by the hero killer's boiling hate. Stain feels like a poltergeist. But he's alive and breathing, and there are little differences that Izuku can barely register with his heart pounding the way it does. Satya was scared and sad and panicking, hiding behind her ender and screaming at anyone who came near. Okamura was wild and blind with vengeance, lashing out at the object of his hatred and anyone close enough to catch the splashback. And Rei? Well, Rei is just Rei. But Stain's is focused. There's intent behind it. And it has nothing to do with power and everything to do with Stain, the hero killer, the man. The man falls unconscious on his feet, eyes blank, mouth open with bared teeth. Izuku looks across and finds everyone there from Ida and Todoroki to Gran Torino to Endeavor himself, frozen in shock. Petrified. And as far as Izuku can tell, Stain didn't need a drop of anyone's blood to do it. They end up in the same hospital room together, set to spend the night under observation. Besides his cuts, Izuku's arm has a hairline fracture from the last punch. His leg is messed up, too, though he's at a loss to remember when or how that happened. He must have been pretty hopped up on adrenaline not to notice. And it's only then, when the nurses finally leave them be and Todoroki and Ida are safe and alive and treated and it's over, it's all over and they're okay and everything is okay, no new ghosts were made, Stain is gone, Ida is safe. That's when it comes at last. He's been holding out this long on fumes and a prayer, staving it off with every distracting thought he can muster, cudgeling his brain and line, but it was only ever temporary. It was only ever a delay. And now the walls are closing in, close, too small, not enough space, not enough air, and the nurses are gone but he still isn't alone, he needs to be alone. Midoriya. Are you all right? He's not sure which of them says that, but either way it's what finally tips the balance out of his favor. Bathroom is all he says before he limps out of the room, and he really hopes there's actually a bathroom nearby, or else he's going to do this in the middle of the hospital hallway. A cold hand closes gently on his shoulder, but before Izuku can panic, the hand squeezes lightly and steers him onward, past the few nurses patrolling the hallway this late, through a door, and into a quiet, blessedly empty restroom. It's a single toilet, not stalls, and Izuku almost sobs with relief as he turns the lock behind him. He finds the corner furthest from the door, sets his back to it, and drowns. The storm comes howling in, cold and relentless as it chases the breath from his lungs and strangles him like a noose he can't break, and not that won't loosen. The back of his head hits the wall tiles, his vision goes hazy and dark, and he falls down, 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 so far down he isn't sure he can find his way back up. It was so close. He came so close. A few seconds slower and Ida would be dead. He called for help, and Todoroki came running, and Todoroki nearly died. He nearly got Todoroki killed, and Ida killed, and himself killed, and everyone killed. How many chances did Stair have to kill them? How many did he ignore? They could have died. And Stair didn't even want them dead enough to actually try. Cold hands find his face, grounding him. Breathe, Midoriya. Can you see me? Blank wide eyes Ida's face with wide eyes. No. I'm not Tenya. Tenya's in the other room. Remember? You're at the hospital. Tensei. Tensei's here. Tensei's not with Ida. What if? Nothing's going to happen. Tensei's pale face breaks through the tunnel vision. Do you hear me? I'm here because I know Tenya's safe. He's alive. And that's because of you, Midoriya. Izuku forces his breathing to slow. He counts on each breath a little too fast, but it still helps to take in each one as slowly as he can manage, hold it as long as he can bear, let it out as steadily as his shuddering chest will allow, and repeat until he feels a little less like he's drowning in good air. You did amazing. Tensei's voice grounds in. I'm sorry I had to put that on you. I'm sorry I didn't think to warn you sooner. You shouldn't have had to do that, but you did, and you saved my little brother. Okay. You saved him. I thought he was going to join me, but he didn't. He is alive in that room because of what you did. Tears drip from his blank eyes. Thank you, Midoriya. Thank you for my brother's life. Thank you for being his friend. Izuku, not trusting himself to speak, only nods. Midoriya, are you all right? Tenya asks. There's a look in his friend's eyes. Are they friends, still? At this point he isn't sure, that he can't name, and before he can attempt to make sense of it, Midoriya is out the door without a word or a glance in his direction. Tenya's heart breaks a little more. It's his own fault. He could have prevented this himself. But no, he'd let himself be blinded. He'd been stupid. What would Tensei think of him now? I need you to not talk to me for a while. He deserves that. He deserves so much more than that. Midoriya has every right to be angry. He almost died because of Tenya's mess, and now. His eyes are fixed on the door as he addresses the only other person in the room. To you it's pathetic, really, after Todoroki already told him to pull himself together. Do you think he'll ever forgive me? He asks. There's a moment of silence. What? There's honest confusion in Todoroki's voice, and it makes Tenya wince. Midoriya, I mean, he says. After all this, I just don't know anymore. When Todoroki doesn't answer, Tenya's eyes switch to the floor. Do you remember what he told me about doing something useful? Helping someone to cope with my loss. I took that and twisted it. Willfully, sir. I knew very well what he meant by it, but I took it and pretended it meant something else and used it to justify. His voice catches. And because of that, because of me, he was almost killed. You were almost killed. I knew what I was probably getting into when I answered that message, Todoroki says. Yes, but it shouldn't have happened. His eyes burn and his head aches, but luckily he doesn't cry again. It did. Don't do it again. Todoroki's words come out blunt, over simple. But is that enough? Tenya hangs his head, tucking his chin in so that his hair falls over his eyes, just in case he does cry after all. Is learning from my mistake enough to make up for the fact that I almost got him killed? I don't know. And that's why I'm asking. I'm just confused by your question, Todoroki says at length. Maybe you know better than I do, since I haven't known him as long as you have. I didn't realize he needed to forgive you. I almost got him killed. Yeah, you mentioned that. Todoroki shifts into a more comfortable sitting position. I mean, that's bad, obviously. I just don't think that's really a problem for him. You saw how angry he is with me, Tenya whispers. Yes. He's been angry with me before, too. Todoroki shrugs. Just because he's angry doesn't mean forgiveness is an issue. In your case, maybe not, Tenya replies, shaking his head. Whatever your quarrel was, at least he didn't nearly die because of it. Which match were you watching? Todoroki, Tenya growls, just a little. Your problem is you've got it backwards anyway, Todoroki says, matter-of-factly. At last, Tenya lifts his head. Backwards? Todoroki is looking at him like Tenya's a particularly special brand of dance. He's not angry with you because he nearly died, either, he says. He's angry because he nearly died. Before Tenya can string together a response, the door to their room opens again, and Midoriya stumbles in looking like the emotional equivalent of being hit by a train. The door swings shut behind him, and he keeps walking straight for Tenya. Midoriya, are you all alarmed? Tenya almost rises to meet him, but Midoriya doesn't seem to hear him. He neither stops nor slows until he reaches Tenya and he's not as careful about it as he probably should be, but Tenya's not in a position to complain about anything Midoriya Izuku does. Before Tenya knows what's happening, there are arms around his neck and is being yanked into a hug so tight he can feel Midoriya shake. Midoriya, I don't know whether or not I should punch you in the face. I'm still deciding. It'll be my left hand if that helps any, because I'm not left-handed, so maybe I won't break anything. On you or me? It didn't have to be me. Midoriya is muffled against Tenya's shoulder, and he shows no sign of letting go. It could have been anyone at all, or me, but it didn't have to be me, and why didn't you just talk to someone, Ida? To Tenya's alarm, he hears his friend sniffle. That wasn't what I meant when I said helpful, and you know it wasn't what I meant, and I'm sorry about your brother, but I'm really mad at you, okay? His shoulder feels damp now. I thought you were dead. I thought I was going to find you dead because I'm slow and I didn't know where you were until it was maybe too late, and I thought you were dead. Tenya opens his mouth to answer, but he can't think of anything to say. I'm happy you're alive. Midoriya's voice breaks. I'm happy we are all alive, and I'm mad at you for making me think we maybe wouldn't be, so don't do that again. Don't ever do that again. I won't, Tenya blurts, and he wishes he could hug back, but his arms are a little out of commission at the moment, so he settles for leaning forward. I promise. I'm sorry, Midoriya. He looks over Midoriya's shoulder to where Todoroki still sits. His classmate gives him a shrug and a knowing look and goes back to staring at his phone. Before long, Midoriya composes himself and returns to his own cot to retrieve his phone. After a moment of fussing with it, rubbing at his test-stained face and clearing his throat, he glances at Todoroki. I don't need a hug, Todoroki says. Wasn't going to. Just thanks. Midoriya won't look him in the eye. For showing up. I thought I'd get more people to come, but I guess not. I was close by, Todoroki replies. My old man's been combing Hosu for a week now, hoping to trip over the hero killer. Got his wish, I guess, Midoriya mutters. Still, thanks for coming. Yeah. Even from a distance, Tenya sees Todoroki shudder a little before composing himself. I did tell you, didn't I? Midoriya blinks at him. Tell me what? My choice for the week. It took me right where I needed to be. The words mean next to nothing to Tenya, but judging by the way Midoriya's eyes widen, they must mean something to him. For a moment, Tenya feels a little alone, like the other two are sharing something that has nothing to do with him. He sits back and turns his eyes upward to the ceiling. He's relieved, of course, that they're alive, that they're mostly all right, and that Midoriya doesn't hate him for the stupid stunt he pulled today. Stain is in custody, Hosu is safe again, but Tensei is still gone. Still just as dead as he ever was. If Stain had escaped, Tensei would still be dead. If Stain had been killed, Tensei would still be dead, his memory still an open wound. He almost got 2 of his classmates killed doing something that never would have made a drop of difference either way. What would he think of me now? They are visitors in the morning. Izuku doesn't mind too much about getting chewed out by Gran Torino again, and Ida has returned to the calm, collected moroseness that has been showing all week. It still hurts to see him like this. Even if the fight is over and they are all okay, it doesn't change the fact that someone he loved very much is still very dead. The fact that Tensei himself has hardly left Ida's side since the previous night doesn't help. It's when Chief Tsurugami of the Hosu Police Department steps in that the 3 of them get a little nervous. Right, turns out there are consequences to beating the absolute hell out of a villain when you don't actually have a hero license. Are you saying we should have let everyone die? Izuku almost jumps at Todoroki's sudden show of temper. His friend is on his feet, shaking with anger. Because that's what would have happened if any of us had followed the rules. Todoroki, Izuku mutters. Todoroki ignores him. Isn't saving lives more important than... Wait, Todoroki, he has a point, Ida breaks in, trying to pacify him. Let him finish, Gran Torino says. Todoroki scowls, but reluctantly falls silent again. The dock-headed police chief clears his throat. Right. As I was saying, that was simply what I had to say as a member of the police. However, at the end of the day, we can only really punish you for what is on the official record. Izuku gapes at him. Now, of course he would receive praise and admiration if this were to go public, but in order to maintain legality, it would also necessitate punishment. On the other paw, there were few witnesses to any legal wrongdoing on your part. It could be concluded from the hero killer's burn wounds that Endeavor was the one who brought him down. And I doubt any hero would turn his nose up at that sort of feather in his cap. Izuku looks to Todoroki instinctively, but his friend's face gives nothing away. Of course, that means that no one can know of your actions yesterday, Tsurugami continues. The choice is ultimately yours. Personally, I think you pups have a promising road ahead of you, and I would hate to see you leashed for such an impressive misstep. Izuku glances over to his friends and finds Ida looking sheepishly relieved, and Todoroki doesn't look happy, but he doesn't look unhappy either. It may seem unfair, Tsurugami continues. I know it must be a bitter pill for you to swallow after you suffered injuries from this whole affair. For an absurd moment, Izuku almost wants to laugh out loud. Chief Tsurugami, he says. I went into that alley thinking I was going to find my friend's corpse. There's an abrupt shift in the mood of the room as all pairs of eyes turn to him. Midoriya, Ida says. Then I thought I was going to be a corpse, Izuku continues, ignoring him. And then Todoroki showed up by himself and I thought, hey, that makes corpse number 3. Thanks, Todoroki says dryly. And in the end, do you know how many corpses there were? 0. 0 corpses. Izuku shrugs. So that's why I really don't care whose name gets slapped in a headline, because either way I'm going to be just sitting here. Enjoying not being a corpse. A brief, awkward silence follows. Gran Torino's forehead makes an audible smacking noise as it mates his gloved hand. What he said, Todoroki says. Well, I wouldn't have put it quite that way, but Ida mutters. Well then. Tsurugami's voice shakes, like he's doing his best not to laugh. I suppose that answers that. By mid-morning the 3 of them are outside the hospital in fresh clothes as they wait for supervisors, parents, or whatever else. Ida's arms are still bandaged but thankfully out of their slings thanks to one of the nurses and her healing quirk, and Todoroki and Izuku sit on either side of him as they reflect, not for the first time, on what they've just survived. Ray, bored, hops over cracks in the sidewalk. Congratulations to your father, I suppose, Ida sighs with a glance at Todoroki. He'll probably be happy with the accolades that come from this. Hell no, Todoroki says flatly. He's just gonna be pissed that he's getting credit he didn't earn himself. Perhaps he did, indirectly, considering your involvement. Ida's voice trails off at the scowl on Todoroki's face. He falls silent, and for a while, neither of the others try to pick up the conversation. Thank you again, Midoriya, Ida says at length. I know I've said it ad nauseum, but thank you. For everything. In a time, Izuku answers. And I do mean that. I got mad at you, and I'll get mad at you again if you pull anything this stupid again, but I'll still help you. I've been thinking about you said, about me taking my brother's name, Ida continues, more quietly. I'm just not sure I'm worthy of it, after all this. At his side, Tensei heaves a sigh. Then make yourself worthy, Izuku tells him. Simple as that. There's a joyless laugh in Ida's voice. It really is. Izuku. At the sound of his name, Izuku sits up straight and looks around until his eyes light upon the figure of his mother, hurrying down the sidewalk. He rises from the bench to meet her as she reaches him, and she grasps his hand in one of hers, the other is on the strap of a canvas bag hanging on her shoulder. Mom. Are you all right? Did you break anything? She's already babbling, tears welling up in her eyes. When I got the call last night, it scared the life out of me even after you called me and told me you were all right because I know you always downplay these things and I thought maybe you might have. Mom. It takes some effort to break through. I'm fine. I promise. Just got a little banged up, that's all. Why you didn't have to come, I still have to go by my supervisors to grab my stuff, and sorry for worrying you. She heaves a sigh of relief. When we get home, you are telling me everything. No leaving anything out, you understand? Yes, Mom. And he means it, gag order or no gag order, she's hearing about this one. She knows about his quirk, both of his quirks, and she's sure as hell hearing about this. Does he also want to brag a little? Maybe. You sure you're all right, she presses. I wasn't alone, Mom, he assures her. The volume of her voice drops. I know, but that doesn't mean they can't exactly. No, I mean, he looks to the bench and steps aside so she can have a better view. Right, Mom, this is Todoroki Shadow and Ida Tenya. Guys, meet my mom. Ida is already on his feet, bowing stiffly and politely until Izuku's mother sputters. Oh. Gee goodness, you're injured, that's perfectly all right, you don't need to stand up, I just came to check on him man. Well, it's very nice to meet you. Both of you. She gives Todoroki a cautious look, and Izuku remembers with a jolt that all she knows about Todoroki is that they basically tried to kill each other at the sports festival. It's nice to meet you as well, Todoroki replies. His eyes flicker toward Izuku, briefly. He looks uncertain. They are my friends, Izuku says, as emphatically as he can manage. We sort of got out of it together. I'll tell you more about it later, it's just complicated. I see her as soften, and she adjusts the bag on her shoulder. Oh, by the way, this was probably silly of me, but she opens the bag, and Izuku's mouth drops open. Mom, seriously. On the verge of laughter, he lifts Mika out of the bag and cradles her against his chest. I wasn't sure what state I'd find you in when I got here, so I thought I'd bring her along, just in case. His mother banes. She's missed you this past week. And sure enough, Mika meows at him insistently, as if she's lecturing him. Scratching her behind the ears seems to calm her down. Calms Izuku down, too. In fact, hey, can I talk to you about something real quick, he asks. Not all that yet, just. Of course. She starts to step away, and Izuku turns back to the bench. Ida is sitting down again, and Izuku takes the opportunity to deposit Mika into his lap. Here, hold my cat, I gotta go talk to my mom, he says, and walks off briskly before Ida has the chance to reply. His mother keeps pace with him, nudging him lightly. You're silly, you know that, she says under her breath. It works. Ida looks back and forth between his friends retreating back and the one-eyed cat purring in his lap until his neck hurts. What? What just? Shadow turns his head away before Ida can see him grinning. Chapter 23. So what's the verdict? Besides a hello, it's the first thing Toshinori has said to Gran Torino in decades. It's still all he can do to spit it out without tripping over his own tongue. The first thing Gran Torino says to him in just as much time is, where the hell did you find this kid? It's a long story. Toshinori cradles the phone against his ear and tries not to wince. He didn't look like much at first, but he showed promise. Shows promise, I mean. A dry chuckle answers him. Promise, that's one way of putting it. What do you mean? I mean I had to knock him around a little on the first day just to get him to use his quirk, and he got frustrated and tried to punch me in the kidneys. This time, Toshinori does wince. Please tell me you didn't make him throw up. I didn't, but I made damn sure he didn't try it again, Torino says dryly. Why, I asked where you found him. I know you, brat, he sure as hell didn't learn that from you. Well, he has an eye for spotting weaknesses, Toshinori says sheepishly. He's an odd one, but driven. Determined to help, no matter the cost to himself. Sounds like some I could mention. Gran Torino goes quiet for a moment. You hear about what happened in Hosu? HM. Oh, yes. The jitters are fading now, and Toshinori can just about relax. Endeavor brought down the hero killer. I'm glad one of my other students lost his brother to that man. That Ida tenure kid, yeah, Gran Torino snorts. And don't believe everything you hear on the news. Endeavor did jack all, your little golden boy and his friends were the ones to take him down. Toshinori feels his heart drop to his stomach. Ingenium's little brother messed up his arms, and your boy looked half dead when I finally caught up to him, Torino goes on. My fault. Lost track of him. He doesn't always follow directions, Toshinori says awkwardly. No kidding. Torino heaves a sigh. But, listen. A coordinated villain attack like this. The League of Villains and the hero killer working together all buddy-buddy. His heart is heavy and he nods, even though Torino has no way of seeing it. Yes, I noticed it as well. It's too perfect, somehow. You aren't the only one who can shout your arrival from the rooftops, Toshinori, Torino tells him. Think about it, high-profile villain like Stair. Skills and charisma to match. Polarizing at best. How many villains do you know who get their own damn merch? Then you have the League of Villains who know how to make a bang but don't have much else going for and. Put them together and what then? They get attention, Toshinori says. From everyone. Heroes, civilians, other villains. Man like Stair has ideals, Toshinori. People with ideals get followers. And now that it's been established pretty damn publicly that Stair was with the League before he got taken down. Toshinori heaves a sigh and sinks down into the nearest chair. So Hosu was what? A publicity stunt. Try a recruitment event. He can almost hear Torino's teeth grinding over the phone. And you think a man-child like that Shigaraki can think up something like that? No. Someone's pulling the strings. He stops, and within that silence, Toshinori's heart sinks further. You don't mean? It's got his stink all over it, Torino says flatly. The one who killed Shimura. Who almost tore you in half. He was supposed to have died, Toshinori whispers. Do you think I'm wrong? And no. Toshinori's hand tightens on the phone. No, it's just. Your boy hardly knows a thing, Torino interrupts. About you. About her. He had quite a few interesting questions for me, and something tells me he'll have a few more for you. What did you tell him? I told him about Nana. Toshinori can't keep back his sharp intake of breath. Don't you me, Brad, I didn't tell him anything that wasn't answering a question he asked. You should have been the one telling him this, not me. I know, Toshinori blurts out. No. I'll talk to him. He rubs his forehead with his free hand. It's past time I told him about. Gran Torino's voice is grim and quiet. All for one. The work experience weekends. Izuku gathers his things and leaves Gran Torino's office. Apartment. The case with his costume is lighter than Izuku remembers it. He is to wonder if it's a psychological thing, or maybe 1 week of getting thrashed by a senior citizen really has done wonders on his muscles. If nothing else, it's been an interesting week. Besides learning to properly harness his power, helping to bring down the hero killer, and nearly dying several times, he's also had some lovely conversations with a few of the people haunting Torino's building. The girl who slipped and drowned in the bath 80 years back knows some good dirty jokes. To say nothing of what he now knows about Miss Shimura. Any more questions, kiddo? Izuku jumps and turns to stare at the tiny old man standing at the door, watching him leave. What? Can't promise you Toshinori won't chicken out, Torino says dryly. So, any last-minute wondering you've been doing, you might as well get it fixed now. Izuku smiles. Thanks for all your help, he says. I won't waste it. Promise. Torino snorts. Better not. I'll have your hide if I hear you do. And I will hear. I have my ways. Me too. It slips out before Izuku can think better of it. It's fine if All Might chickens out. He'll find what he's looking for either way. He's going to get Miss Shimura to talk to him or die trying. Hey kid. Torino barks before Izuku can turn to leave. I've got one question for you. Izuku looks at him. There's a note of humor on the old hero's face. Who are you? It brings him back to his first day, having that question shouted in his face. Izuku frowns, confused. I'm Midoriya Izuku, he says. I'm kind of not anyone yet. Bull. Torino shakes his head. Besides, that ain't the name I was asking her for. And Izuku must be all kinds of dense because it takes him a moment to realize what Gran Torino is asking him. Oh. It's Decker. For a moment the name feels odd and awkward on his tongue, like he's a little kid trying to curse for the first time. You sure about that? Torino asks. The way you say it makes it sound more like an insult than a name. Izuku shrinks a little. It takes some getting used to, he admits. Because it kind of was. At Torino's raised eyebrow, he shrugs. But not anymore. It's mine now. My name. My hero name. And nobody can use it to hurt me anymore. His hand tightens on the handle of the case. If I can take a name like that and make it mine, then I can do the same with One for All. Finally he turns away before he can see Torino's reaction. Maybe it seems stupid, but it's still mine. One more question. Torino calls after him. Where the hell did Toshinori find you? Under a bridge. Izuku answers without slowing or looking back. Torino's laughter follows him to the end of the block. It's quiet when Shadow gets home, and he has learned to fear the quiet when his father is at home. When Endeavor is away, the house is safe. When Endeavor is at home and the house is noisy, then at least Shadow knows where he is and what he's doing. Even if it's noisy because it's the middle of a training session and Endeavor is in his face with fire and fists, at least Shadow knows what to expect. It's familiar, and in this house, that's as safe as Shadow is going to get. But now it's quiet, and Shadow's stomach twists and shreds itself with dread. His arm is still bandaged, with the dull ache and itch of a healing gash. In the wake of the Hosu incident, the hospital could not afford to waste healing quirks on a flesh wound. Right now, his arm is a weakness. And this house makes Shadow keenly aware of his weaknesses in a way that no other place does. He wonders where his father is. What he's doing. They've arrived separately, but Shadow knows that Endeavor arrived first. Does the old man know he's here now, too? Fuyumi is in the living room when Shadow walks in, and she looks up from the homework assignments she's grading. Hey, she says, and her voice is as soft as ever. Shadow has never heard Fuyumi shout. He got home 10 minutes ago. He's been quiet. I can't tell what mood he's in. Shadow nods dully. You okay? His sister tilts her head, as if trying to angle herself into his line of vision. You were right in the middle of that stuff in Hosu, huh? Shadow is about to reply when the floor creaks and his father steps into the room. Todoroki doesn't look at his daughter. He never does, by the way he treats her. Fuyumi is a houseguest at best and a tenant at worst. And when Shadow is in the room, he acts as if he has no older children at all. His firstborn is invisible to him, and Shadow wishes he could be so lucky. Damn legal system. Endeavor's voice is a growl. Shadow's stance shifts into something close to parade rest. Hero Killer would have made a good debut, and those bastards hit us with a gag order. Flames wreathe his throat, flickering irately. Giving me credit, as if I need a damn handout like that. His hard eyes bore into Shadow's. And as for you. Shadow keeps his face carefully neutral. His father moves before he has the chance to react. Shouder blinks, his teeth clack together with impact, and he finds his back pressed painfully to the wall, the back of his head tender from colliding with it. Endeavor is in his face, pinning him in place with a handful of Shouder's shirt in his fist. "Do not ever," his father snarls, "disobey or ignore a direct command from me again. Do you understand me, Shouder?" Over Endeavor's shoulder, Shouder can see Fuyuma rising from the couch with a look of alarm on her face. "In the field, my word is gospel." Endeavor's eyes burn with anger. "In the future, you will listen. And you will do exactly as I say when I say it. If I say jump, then you say how high. So help me, Shouder, if you ever run off when I give you a command again, you'll wish you'd been born quirkless by the time I'm done with you. I already do, sometimes." Fuyumi hovers in the background, wide-eyed and shaking, mouth half open as if she's trying to gather her wits to speak up. Shouder urges her silence with a sharp motion of one hand out of his father's line of vision. "And do you honestly think I wasn't told the details of what actually happened?" his father demands. "I'm almost glad this ended with a gag order. I would have died of shame if word got out that you stayed in the background and let two of your competitors deal the final blow. It's as if you're doing your damnedest to look weak and make me look like a fool." His fist digs into Shouder's chest, pressing him painfully against the wall. Ice spreads from where his right shoulder touches it, but Shouder isn't paying attention to that. What can his father do? Not kill him, certainly, that would be counterproductive. Stain tried to kill him and failed. What can Endeavor do but shout and curse, or leave bruises and minor burns that oppressive ice can treat? But Shouder doesn't think of that, or of the cold rage on Endeavor's face. He doesn't think of the fist against his chest, or how easy it would be for his father to lose control and let flames touch him. Instead, he thinks of a smile. Shouder knows what it's like to have it pointed at him. He'd thrown down the gauntlet, and Midoriya had answered him with a smile that showed all his teeth and fell just short of reaching his eyes. It was the sort of smile that stuck with you, that left things crawling on your back long after you stopped looking at it. It kept you asking questions, wondering if it's where and knew something you didn't. Why else would someone smile like that? But then, Shouder knows other things now, too, like the limb-locking paralysis of the hero killer's quirk, and that split-second helpless terror of seeing death approach and having no way of stopping it. But he didn't have to stop it in the end, not with Midoriya Izuku crouched over him, eyes glinting eerily, almost glowing in the dimly lit alley, baring his teeth as if he was fully prepared to use them in the fight. It turns out that smile means something very different when it's pointed at something that wants to hurt him. Midoriya Izuku is frightening, and not in the way that Todoroki Enji is frightening. Endeavor is powerful and spiteful and angry, but his anger is ordinary and his desires are plain and transparent. Shouder knows what drives him, he knows what he's capable of and how far he'll go to get what he wants. He doesn't know that about Midoriya. He's not sure he wants to know how far someone who smiles like that will go. Just for an instant, Shouder imagines what it would feel like to see that smile pointed at Endeavor. "Well?" His father's voice brings him back to the present. "Have you anything to say?" And Shouder stares at him, numb and bewildered and wondering because... "No," he says aloud, voice rasping. He can't speak his mind, not when all he can think is, "My friend is scarier than you." Izuku's shoes are barely off when his mother meets him at the entryway and catches him in a tight hug. Guilt fills him. He hadn't thought of her, hadn't thought of how she might feel, how she would worry, and he returns it without a word. The door behind them is shut, and their only company is Rei and Mika and maybe a couple of the other apartment ghosts. Mrs. Matsuda can be nosy sometimes. And so, with his mother's arms around him, Izuku lets the story fall from his lips. Ingenium's death and reappearance, Ida's grief, Izuku's own growing worries, all leading up to what happened in that Hosu alley. His mother is quiet for a moment, still holding him. When at last she speaks, her voice is hushed. "You didn't go looking for Stain," she says. "I was looking for Ida." Izuku swallows painfully. "Because I thought he might go looking for Stain, and even if he didn't, Hosu was a mess. I was worried about him. And you called for help." "I should have done it sooner," Izuku admits. "But when Tensei showed up, his voice catches. I panicked. I don't know anything about heroics," she says, her voice muffled against his shoulder. I don't know what to do or how to do it, but Izuku, I can't think of anything you did wrong. And you were still in danger. I did my best, Izuku whispers. And Mon. Finally, she pulls back. Her eyes are red from crying. Yes. I've thought about it, and why you know what? In spite of the tears, Izuku manages a smile of his own. I don't know if I would have found Ida in time if Tensei hadn't led me to him. And later, Rei brought Todoroki to help. I don't know how she did it, but she did. So that means I was wrong. His vision blurs. My quirk, my old quirk, I mean. My original quirk. I guess it can help me save people after all. I know you can, his mother replies. If anyone can find a way, it's you, Izuku. Just be careful. Please, whatever else happens, be careful. I will, Mon. She seems to rally herself, wiping the tears away. Good. Now are you hungry? Izuku smiles. A little bit. Just give me a second to put my stuff in my room. Marino meets him in the hallway before he reaches his bedroom, looking happy to see him. Izuku likes Marino, she's friendly and kind, and sometimes she'll help him calm Kurosawa down when the other ghost forgets that he's dead and returns to the day that Aunt Bodler shot him in his own home. Oh, good, you're back. She's been waiting for you since yesterday. Who? Izuku blinks owlishly at her. Didn't catch her name, but she says she knows you, Marino replies as Rei moves past them to go to Izuku's room. Tall, black hair, looks like she could bench a guy twice her size. She seemed nice enough. Marino frowns. Should I have chased her off, or? And no, it's fine, Izuku's voice trails off and is already running for his bedroom. He steps inside, one hand reaching for the open door. Hi, kiddo. Miss Shimoa sits on his bed, hands folded in her lap. She's smiling, but her face is unreadable. Did you have a good week? Izuku stares at her, speechless. He drops his things, turns, and walks back out toward the kitchen. Mon, I need to, his thoughts are beginning to swirl, and he wrings his hands and wards off his days. In my room, there's someone I need to talk to. She looks up from the stove with a look of concern on her face. Everything all right? Nothing dangerous. I just need to have a conversation, and I don't know how long it'll take, sorry. Food won't be ready right away, she assures him. Don't take any nonsense, now. Oh, I won't, he mutters. When he returns, he closes his door behind him. Hopefully this won't end in him yelling, but at this point he can't be sure. Silence stretches between them. Even Rei is quiet. So, Miss Shimoa says at last, her voice soft. I take it from the look on your face that you know a few more things. Why didn't you tell me? Izuku spits out. Miss Shimoa falls silent, shutting her eyes. The corners of her mouth deepen. Izuku grits his teeth, riding out the knot of hurt that rises and falls in his chest. Why didn't you tell me you had one for all, he asks. You saw me, you knew I couldn't control it, and I was hurting myself, and I needed help, so why didn't you say anything? I'm sorry, Sprout. I have a name. Izuku bursts out, only to feel guilty instantly when she winces. Oh look. I don't understand. Something this important, don't you care? If you had one for all, and I'm its next wielder, then shouldn't it matter to you that I use it properly? Of course it matters, she tells him. Then why didn't you say something, he asks. You knew I was struggling, so why are you still mad at me for lying to All Might? About my quirk? No, that's not it at all. She shakes her head, and her hands tighten into fists in her lap. Then why? He stops short, because now he just sounds like he's whining. He grinds his teeth and forces himself to take a deep breath. When that doesn't quite slow his temper, he runs his fingers through his hair until they catch in the tangles. Oh look, I'm not, you've helped me, okay? Teaching me how to fight. And I'm grateful, I really am, but he raises his eyes and finds Miss Shimoa looking at him with sadness in her face. I just don't understand why you wouldn't tell me what you were to him. And maybe I should have guessed, and maybe I should have, but... His voice trails off, and Miss Shimoa hangs her head so that her hair falls over her face. Midoriya, You said before that you weren't sure I'd forgive you when I found out what you did to him, Izuku says. What did you mean by that? I asked Gran Torino and he said nothing bad happened between you. What did you do to him? Nothing. That doesn't even. I mean nothing, Midoriya. Miss Shimoa is on her feet, quite literally in the blink of an eye. I mean I couldn't, she flickers in and out of view. I couldn't do anything for him, I just. And for the first time, Izuku truly sees her. She's wearing her hero costume, or at least what's left of it. One glove is in shreds and barely covers her left hand. The other is gone entirely and the hand beneath it is bloody and broken. Her bodysuit is black, or it's red, or maybe it's scorched and blood-stained so thoroughly that the original color can no longer be seen. The remains of a pale cape hang in soiled tatters from her shoulders, and her hair, torn from its upto, hangs over her face in snarled clumps. And her face. Izuku's stomach twists itself in knots, and he tastes bile at the back of his throat. He can't see her eyes past the tangled hair, and with that much blood encrusting her hair and her face, he wonders for a moment if she even still had eyes when she died. Shimoa Nana, the seventh wielder of One for All, stands before him mangled and broken. Not ghost pale and spectral, but dark with blood and deep bruising and grisly wounds. Izuku can't even tell which was the one that killed her. Not a pretty sight, is it? She tries to smile with a broken mouth. Izuku sees the rust-brown streaks where blood spilled past her lips. Izuku is glad when the tears come. This isn't the way he wants to see Miss Shimoa, strong, bright, vibrant Shimoa who throws nicknames around that tease but don't sting, who taught him to throw a proper punch, who loves All Might enough to stay with him every minute of every day. I wish you'd told me, he whispers. Me too. Her voice cracks. But I got selfish. But why? I told you. You love Toshi. You love him with every inch of your heart, and I was so ashamed, Midoriya. I saw how much you love him, and I couldn't bring myself to tell you that I abandoned him. Izuku blinks the wet glow from his eyes to find tears cutting clean tracks through the blood on her face. But you didn't mean to, he says. You didn't leave him on purpose. You died. Does it matter? It was the same in the end. I took a risk that I knew was more likely to kill me than not, and I wasn't thinking of him when I made that choice, Midoriya. She hangs her head. I was thinking about myself, about how it would affect me, not him. I was so willing to die for the greater good and be brave and selfless, and I didn't think of what I was leaving behind. I got so caught up in my responsibilities as a hero that I forgot my responsibility to raise him. She lifts her broken arms. I died a pathetic death, and I left him. You, Izuku starts, but she shakes her head. And I didn't tell you about who I used to be, she says. Because if I did, then you would have asked for my knowledge of One for All, and I could never have told you no once you knew that. But what's wrong with that? Izuku presses, his voice plaintive. Why wouldn't you want to? Because it isn't fair. Her form flickers again, and the shreds of her cape stir as if in a breeze that Izuku can't feel. He didn't get to learn from Mian, and I couldn't stop thinking that it wouldn't be fair to him, that you could but not him. She raises her head a fraction, and her hair parts from her dead white eyes. The corners of her mouth are turned upward, but her smile holds no joy. But it wasn't fair to you either, was it? Izuku watches as her smile fades, and more tears cut through the blood. I'm sorry, Midoriya. Her voice shakes with held-back sobs. I am so sorry. Izuku rocks back on his heels, lost. His face feels stiff with drying tears. He grinds his teeth, grasping for the right words. I think I understand. And I'm glad that you did help me. When you taught me to fight. I got scared, Miss Shimoa tells him softly. When your school was attacked. I could recognize them. Some of the other spirits that came through with them. The whole thing reeked of him. For a moment the sound of her voice drives itself into his ears like a drill bit. You could have died. They could have killed you while you were still so young, and finally she meets his eyes. And all I could think was that he's lost so much. Too much. More than anyone should have to. She lifts her bloody hand toward him, not quite reaching for him. I couldn't let him lose you, too. Fresh tears scalded their way down Izuku's face. He can't talk through the thickness in his throat, and even if he could, what can he even say to this? I've made so many mistakes, she says. Dying didn't make me any wiser. And if you can't forgive me, I understand, but please. Please let me keep helping you. There's so much I need to fix. Izuku looks at her through his streaming eyes, at the blood and wounds and the brokenness on her face that has nothing to do with burns. He can't even tell which wound was the one that killed her. If you want to ask me if I was there, then just say it, Gran Torina had said. I wasn't. No one was. She looks like she died slowly, Izuku thinks. She looks like she died crying. Nana feels the brush of Midoriya's fingers against hers, warm and alive and everything that she is not. She looks at him and finds his hair hanging over his sunken eyes, hiding them from view. His mouth is a thin, tight line, tense with anger, and after what she's told him, she doesn't blame him. What must he think of her now? But then he lifts his chin, and his dark curls part, and his tear-stained eyes burn with anger as he brushes his fingertips against her broken hand. When he speaks, his voice is cold and quiet. Who hurt you? If she still had a heartbeat, then maybe it would stutter to a halt. He is angry, not with her but for her, angry with someone he has never met, whose name he does not even know. She wants to laugh. She wants to cry. She wants to pull him into a hug. Heaven help her, she doesn't want to answer. She wants this kind, selfless boy to stay far away from All for One. She wishes Tashi's successor were anyone else, at the same time as she knows that he could not have made a better choice. But she has done enough needless secret-keeping. And so, she takes his hand, lets her tears mingle with the blood on her face, and tells him. Chapter 24. Sometimes, in the dead of night, Izuku finds himself in familiar places. For example, tonight he stands in the USJ and watches the Numu crush Aizawa into the ground. It's never a question whether or not he drains in color, because Izuku sees red in them. On Aizawa's face, on the cracked ground beneath him, smeared on the Numu's hands, on his own hands, too. His limbs are locked in place, his chest frozen, he can't even take a breath to scream. Aizawa falls from the Numu's dark hand like a broken doll, and then there are two of him, and the second blinks at Izuku with blank wide eyes. His form is wavering, but solid. Pale but opaque. Dead, not unconscious. Shigaraki grasps Tsuyu by the face, and she screams as she falls to ash. Her ghost appears, still screaming, twisting even though she's dead and nothing can hurt her anymore. Shigaraki turns to him then, twitching fingers reaching and grasping for Izuku's eyes. He shuts them and opens them in the alley. There are ghosts again, and even in his dreams he can count and the numbers make sense, 17 for the heroes he doesn't know, 18 for Tensei, 19 for Rei, 20. Ida is number 20, standing over his own body, eyes locked wide and pleading on Izuku's while Izuku's breath comes in short gasps because he ran and ran but he was too slow. Blades flash in the dark. His blood spills, his limbs lock. He calls for help. It comes out as a whisper but he calls and calls. Tensei called but nobody came, Ida called but Izuku was too slow. He calls again and Todoroki comes running, flames in technicolor, orange and red make the shadows dance, and Izuku still can't move, still can't scream, can only watch as Stain cuts him down and Todoroki falls just beyond his reach, eyes shut. They open again, not gray and blue but milky white. And is the only one now who isn't dead, because he couldn't save them, couldn't do anything, not fight or protect or even run fast enough to stop a sword. He can't win a fight with his quirk, he can't save people, all he can do is talk to them when they are already dead. He wakes up with all the abruptness of a slap in the face, tangled in damp sheets, drenched and sticky with sweat. He's already nauseous, already crying, already rolling over to gag himself with his own pillow before his hoarse sobs can wake his mother. Cold hands pad at his head, snagging in his tangled, sweat-stiffened hair. The tears subside, and he shivers, curling in on himself in a tight ball, waiting for the crawling on his back to go away, for the shadows to back off, for the visions to leave. It takes a moment for his eyes to focus. The clock by his bedside reads 4:28, and he struggles and keeks until the encumbering sheets are crumpled at the foot of his bed. He sits up, pajamas clinging wetly to his skin. He doesn't hear the pad of paws on the carpet, he only realizes Mika is there at all when she leaps into his lap and steps all over his thighs, kneading until the pricking of her claws brings him more fully into wakefulness. Izuku's eyes are still mostly shut as he reaches for her and clutches her against his chest. She wriggles in his arms, but she doesn't claw or bite or struggle free. The light comes on, and he jumps, eyes fluttering open to look to the door. Rimon, he begins, but his door is barely ajar and the apartment beyond is quiet but for the usual background creaking in the walls. Rei hovers by the light switch, dark hair falling over her face. When Izuku focuses on her, her hands move. Go back to sleep. Nope, he rasps. No. Absolutely not. Not going back there. He shuts his eyes again and shakes his head furiously, as if that will jar the memory of Aizawa-sensei's dead face from his mind. He gets a few seconds of blissful blankness before it comes back. Faces crowd in his mind. Aizawa-sensei becomes Ida, becomes Todoroki, becomes Tensei, becomes such a screaming and crying as her mangled hands clutch the wheel of her car with its cut brakes. Tears drip down to his chin again. He wipes his eyes and reaches for his phone without even thinking. It's automatic. When his eyes clear again, he finds that he's opened up his text messages with Ida. He doesn't remember making that decision, but here he is. He scrolls up, mouth twisting wryly at the long series of messages from his phone to Ida's, all marked as read but unanswered. He swipes his way back to the bottom and finds one new message, the first text he's gotten from Ida in nearly a week. 1:28 Ida. You're probably asleep right now. If so, I apologize if I wake you. If not, then you really should be going to sleep, Midoriya. 1:30 Ida. I hope we can speak more later, but I wanted to say this as soon as possible. 1:34 Ida. Thank you, and I'm sorry. You deserved better from me. Izuku's thumbs move to reply before he thinks better of it. If this means that Ida will be back to replying within 3 minutes of receiving a text message, then he doesn't want to risk waking his friend up. Anything they say to each other on this subject will be better left for a face-to-face conversation. He switches to his text conversation with Todoroki, and his mouth twists into a self-conscious smile when he's greeted with a picture of Mika with his kitschy old All Might headband balanced on her head and being a very good sport about it. Right, he'd stayed up until nearly 1 in the morning, working off nervous energy by snapping stupid photos of his cat and sending them to Todoroki. He takes a gamble then and sends another message. For 36 of me. Hey sir. For 36 of me. Let me know when your injuries are better. For 37 of me. Once they are, we can spar again. After what happened with Stair, it'd be good to get in some extra practice. He ponders those messages for a while before deciding that there's not much more he can add. There's no icon or indication that Todoroki is replying, or even that he's read the messages, so Izuku sighs with relief. Todoroki's still asleep, and Izuku hasn't woken him. The bed dips a little when Rei bounces onto it to sit by him. She settles into his lap, craning her neck to see the screen of his phone. The tip of her tongue pokes out of her mouth, and she makes a grab for it. Izuku barely pulls it out of her reach. Hey come on, Rei makes grabbing motions, and in spite of the lingering nightmares, Izuku manages a smile. Okay, let me just pick something more interesting. Rei fidgets impatiently, and he brings up his YouTube app. Weariness pulls at him, promising punishment and regret once the day comes. But the thought of sleep makes him feel physically ill and is no stranger to poor rest, so he settles down with a ghost and a cat vying for the most comfortable spot in his lap and watches Vine compilations and baby goat videos until the sun rises. Uraraka Ochiko is not stupid. Some people might look at her, take in her bright smile and her cheery disposition, maybe even overhear some of the conversations she has with Kirishima when they are both riled up and excited, and leap to the airhead conclusion without stopping to think. It's irritating at best, even if being underestimated can be useful once in a while. It has nothing to do with grades or intelligence or how fast she can write a 3-page essay on the history of quote politics. It is everything to do with having eyes and ears and a halfway decent memory and the ability to use those things in conjunction with one another. For example, when she walks up to UA's front gate on the first day back from internship week, she sees Deku not too far ahead, walking practically cheek to cheek with Todoroki, of all people. As she trots a little to catch up, she gets close enough to hear them chatting, and even catches the last bit of whatever Todoroki is saying. And you look terrible right now. Even worse than usual. Look me in the eye and tell me you've been sleeping like a baby after that, Deku retorts. Fair enough. And she remembers that the last time she saw them interacting in any way was when they may or may not have tried to kill each other at the sports festival. She also remembers that Todoroki does a lot of things, but she's never seen him chat with anyone or heard him ask after anyone's well-being. He's not mean, per se, especially compared to Bakuga, but he's standoffish and doesn't really talk to anyone, and he said he wasn't there to make friends in front of basically the entire class, sir. Oh, well. She's certainly not going to find anything out by standing all the way back here. Ochako is not stupid, and neither is she shy, so she trots to catch up with an easy spring in her step and a bright morning, Deku. In just a few paces she's side by side with Deku as he turns to look, and okay, she definitely sees what Todoroki was talking about. Whoa, Deku, you look a little rough, she blurts, and if Ida were here then he'd definitely chide her for being tactless. But what else can she say? There are fading bruises on his face, he has a half-healed split lip, and well. Come to think of it, she's never seen him without dark circles under his eyes, but they look even worse than usual this morning. And if he looks bad enough that even Todoroki is commenting on it. How was your week? Deku asks. It was pretty cool, but come on, what about your week? Is Deku scatterbrained because of obvious sleep deprivation, or is he purposely changing the subject? I saw the news, Deku. Everybody saw the news. I mean, the hero killer. She could try to ease into it, but she's been sitting on this question since they last spoke over the phone, and needless to say she's a bit impatient. It's all she can do to keep from punching the air in agitation. You're really lucky Endeavor showed up when he did, because she can't think of a proper way to finish that sentence. I mean, what was that even like? How did that even happen? And Deku shoots a glance at Todoroki. She recognizes that kind of glance. It's a solidarity glance. And I don't know how to deal with this, so I am looking to you for a Q glance. It's the kind of look that passes between friends or close allies, and not two people who went from never talking to furiously punching each other back and forth across an arena on national television. Where was your supervisor when it happened? She presses. I mean, I guess, was he okay? What was he like? Very small and merciless. In spite of herself, Ochako sputters out a laugh. He wasn't too hard on you, was he? Gunhead was actually pretty cool to work under. And a lot nicer than he looks, but still, she rolls her shoulders and the movement reassures her. She's never felt this physically secure in her own skin before. Well, I really learned a lot. I hope I get the chance to show it off in class. Inwardly she shakes herself, she's getting off track again. That's great. I learned a lot, too. He smiles, and it's genuine enough to make the bags under his eyes look a little less awful. My supervisor was memorable. Helpful, there. That's good. But more important than anything, are you okay? Something flashes in his eyes, and he glances to Todoroki again, but Todoroki's already wandered off, so he turns back to her. Well, yeah, I'm fine, first off. But, his voice trails off. Deku, Ochako tilts her head so that her face is still within his line of vision as they enter the school building. You do realize that not answering the question makes me want to know the answer even more, right? Well, yeah. His shoulders slump a little. And that the longer you take to think of an answer, the more I'm going to think you are telling the truth. At least he has the grace to look guilty. Ochako sighs. Deku, you remember what we said to Ida last week, right? If something's wrong. It's not, not now, it's just. I know you don't have to tell me if you really don't want to, she continues. But I am still your friend, and if something's going on, then I do want to, Deku blurts out, and there's no hesitance or anything in how he says it. It slips out as if on its own, and she's inclined to believe it. I do, I just can't. No judgments, Ochako tells him. Whatever it is, I'll listen and I'll take it to the grave. Wild horses couldn't drag it out of me. No, a pain crosses his face. I literally can't tell you. As in, there are real, legitimate, legal reasons I can't tell you. Oh. Well, she wasn't quite expecting that. But I can tell you that it's okay, and I'm fine, and whatever it is, it's over now, he goes on. They are close to the classroom. If you're sure, Ochika says reluctantly. She wasn't expecting to get stonewalled for a reason like that. And just like that, in spite of the exhaustion ringing his eyes, Deku slips back into his normal cheery, chatty self, and Ochika lets the rest of it slide for now. Whatever else is going on, he's here and is okay, and a little bit of lust sleep is pretty tame, as possible downsides go. Still, she finds it noteworthy that both Deku and Ida gravitate to Todoroki's desk before class starts, as if it's the most normal thing in the world for them to stand around him and chat about whatever. And yeah, that sort of makes sense, since whatever went down with the hero killer apparently involved all three of them, but after his little speech before the sports festival, she'd kind of assumed that Todoroki didn't really do friendships. Soon, though, it's easy to get caught up in the post-internship excitement. Everyone's come out of it with something new. Baikugo has a new haircut, of all things. From the sound of it, Jiru and Tsuyu have racked up some solid experience and training, too. Maeda looks delightfully traumatized. Ochiko thinks back to her and training, the throws and maneuvers now drilled solidly into her head, and can't help but throw herself back into that combat mindset, and throw a few jabs, as well. The trio in the back are soon the talk of the class, though. As it turns out, she isn't the only one with questions. The moment Deku, Ida, and Todoroki are all in the same place, their classmates are practically mobbing them for details. Ochiko winces a little when she sees it. If she'd realized that everyone would be pumping them for information, she might have eased up earlier. She looks anxiously to Deku, eyeing the sullen look on his face. He isn't putting on a cheery mask like he did with her. Did you guys watch that video of the hero killer, though? Kaminari pipes up. Where he was giving that speech before they took him in. I don't know what it was about him, but it was kind of badass, right? Am I the only one who thought that? Ochiko grinds her teeth and looks to Ida. Her friend's face looks like stone. Not really. It's not Ida who says that. If Ida's face is stone, then the look in Deku's eyes is positively molten. He had that conviction, though, right? Kaminari goes on, though the grin on his face is faltering. Like, he's got this one-track mind about his ideas or whatever. That's just my take, anyway. I think Deku's face softens back to sullen. I think having a message is fine, but if the only way to send it is by killing people, then you don't have anything worth saying. Well, yeah, but... Read the room, Kaminari. Ochiko blurts out, and he finally jolts in his seat and seems to remember that Ida is there. Oh, right. Kaminari looks positively mortified. I'm sorry, Ida, I didn't even think. It's all right. Ida isn't smiling, but his voice is even. You aren't entirely wrong about his conviction. I can understand why someone looking from the outside would see him that way. His brow furrows, turning his cold face to steel, and for the first time in well over a week, his hand comes down swiftly in a wide arc, karate chopping the air. Still, Midoriya is also correct. His chosen method of following his ideals is through death and terror. That is the what, and in this case especially, it holds far greater weight than a Y dot. Ochiko knows she isn't imagining it when Deku stands a little straighter. As future heroes, we have a responsibility to be conscious of our actions and of their potential implications and consequences, regardless of the reasons behind them. Ida continues, and there isn't an eye in the room that isn't on him. And I intend to set an example in that respect. Now, class is almost upon us, so everyone to your seats. Their classmates shuffle to comply, and Ochiko feels a sort of relief settle in the room. This is a return to something approaching normalcy after what happened to Ingenian. Ochiko takes a deep breath and lets it out as a sigh of relief. Whatever went down over the past week, whatever new secrets Deku's keeping, or is forced to keep, it looks like Ida, at least, is back to his old self again. Foundational Heroics class sees them all in their hero costumes again, gathered in one of UA's many outdoor training facilities, and Izuku tries not to make it obvious that he's virtually vibrating with excitement. He'd felt clumsy the first time he wore this costume in Gran Torino's living room. It had felt awkward and intimidating, like a little kid trying on his parents' shoes. He hadn't been used to the new design then, the new material and weight of it. It had been a far cry from the jumpsuit his mother had sewn for him with her own 2 hands, heavy and unfamiliar in ways he couldn't put into words. But today, he can wear this costume and say that he's officially fought a villain in it. Or, well, he can't actually say that, as per their agreement with Tsurudemi, but anyway. Not important. What is important is All Might and the exercise before them. Simple enough, however All Might dresses it up as a rescue exercise. It's a race through an obstacle course, albeit a complex one modeled after an urban environment to reach a single target while keeping damage to a minimum. It's like one-sided capture the flag. Point A to point B, Izuku can recognize an assessment when he sees one. This is their chance to show off what they've learned from shadowing the pros. It's kind of perfect, all things considered. If there's one thing Izuku's taken from the past week, it's how to hold as to someone in distress as fast as his 5% control of his quirk will allow. What better way to show off full cal? And yet, well, there's always room for improvement. Izuku is never more aware of that than when his mind slips back to that night and runs through the events yet again, his lost count of how many times he's relived them. Hindsight has dulled the pride and relief, and with each slow-motion mental replay, he finds more and more mistakes. It's a lot to think about. The fact of the matter is, Izuku's still sort of guilty of the very same thing that made him lose his temper and scream at Todoroki in front of thousands of people. He's letting his own abilities fall to the wayside, unused. His reasons for setting the ghosts aside may be different from Todoroki's reasons for refusing to use fire, but the end result is the same, and the what is still more important than the why. 19 ghosts. There were 19 ghosts in that alley, vengeful, angry things with nothing but hatred for the man he was fighting, and he'd barely bothered to take advantage of that. For all intents and purposes, Stair had been laughably outnumbered and utterly unaware of the fact. The next villain might not, probably definitely won't, bother playing nice or talking politics. The hero killer was a wake-up call. If he wants to live long enough to be a hero, then he's going to have to use what assets he has. He's going to have to use the allies that he has. There's barely enough time to throw together a strategy, and the one he lands on is dead simple. Ray, could I ask a favor? His lips barely move as he speaks, and he edges away from his nearest classmates. They'll hear him talking, but he's already well established as a mumbler. His friends' eyes are on him, wide and eager. I need an extra set of eyes, and you're fast. So just when I start, go ahead of me. Find places to touch down. Handholds. Quick paths warn me about hazards. He gives her a hopeful look. Can you do that? The vigorous nodding is encouraging. As luck would have it, he's in the first group. He, Ashida, Zero, Ojiro, and Ida, Sen's costume, since his is undergoing repairs, line up at the edge of the building they are gathered on. He hears whispers from his classmates. Midoriya is probably at a slight disadvantage. You never know, Jiru says. His abilities are kind of hard to nail down, you know. True, Yaoya replies. But he always injures himself when he uses them, so it's difficult to say. Starting group, take your positions. Ray vanishes from his side. She reappears not far ahead, hovering at the other side of the gap between this platform and the next. The first leap is the simplest. Beyond that is a twisting urban maze of piping, rails, walls, and rooftops, a freerunner's dream come true. Izuku lets out the breath he's been holding, waits for the signal, and hopes that Ray won't let him fall. It might have been kinder to give young Midoriya a few rounds to watch before having him race. The boy is excellent with analysis, after all. But he won't always have time to sit a while and think, especially when he's so determined to charge into danger. Better to encourage him to think on his feet. Behind his smile, Toshinori swallows his worries. Gran Torino is a formidable teacher, but he did only have 1 week to work with. He can only hope it was enough. Well, he's about to find out, isn't he? Start. Young Sira, predictably, snags an early lead, and there's a blur of grain, dark green fabric, lit up with sparks like lightning coiled around agile lens. Midoriya shoots past Sira like an arrow from a bow, overtaking him as he bounds over rooftops and leaps from foothold to foothold. A hush falls over the watching students, and within it, in the distance, comes a familiar voice. Woohoo! He's never heard that sound from his student before. It's all Toshinori can do to keep from laughing aloud. Kirishima is the first to break the shocked silence. Look at him go. Is that even the same quirk? Man, who knew Midoriya could park out like that? Kaminari adds. Surprise ripples through the rest. Kirishima and Uraraka both are positively gleeful. Bakugo looks outraged to the point of being personally offended. The rest look varying levels of shocked, though Bakugo is the only one who seems to take this new development as a bad thing. In fact, the only one who doesn't seem surprised is Todoroki. If anything, the not smile on his face is verging on smug. To all of those watching, from the students awaiting their turn to the teacher awaiting the victor at the finish line, Midoriya's reflexes seem to have improved by leaps and bounds, though his movements are a little rough. At one point he drops his face into the crook of one arm, which no doubt hinders his vision even if it's only for a moment. Zero's catching up, Uraraka remarks. Come on, Deku, you can do it. It makes sense, Yaoirozu says. This group has the most maneuverability, but Zero's quirk is probably the best suited to this exercise. He doesn't have to touch down as often, provided he can find points to swing from, and this environment is full of them. It's much more difficult to predict a stable foothold. I'm sorry, is no one else gonna acknowledge that Midoriya just dabbed? Kaminari asks. Wait, he did. Kirishima says. I thought he was sneezing or something. Still, look at those reflexes, Tsuyu pipes up. Jumping's tricky if you can't see where you're going to land, but it's like he's thinking 2 steps ahead. It's pretty cool. It's pretty much neck and neck between them at this point, Jiru says. My money's on Zero, though. He can feel the wind in his hair. Is this why dogs stick their heads out of car windows? It feels fantastic. Izuku's stomach turns somersaults as if he's on a roller coaster of his own making. Ray stays ahead of him, scouting out a safe, stable path through the replica cityscape. Zero's still hot on his trail, swinging like an armored monkey as he closes the distance between them. Izuku hears the whoop of Tate nearby and chances a glance over his shoulder to see how close his classmate is. It's a mistake, he misses the thick pipe that he was aiming for, foot skimming off the edge of it. He can't hold back the yell of dismay as he feels himself drop. One hand stretches upward on instinct, reaching for a handhold that isn't there. A pair of hands catches him, cold leaking through the sleeve of his costume. Izuku finds himself promptly dragged back up, clumsily scrubbling for poachers as is helped back onto the bar. Trembling at his near-miss, he manages to hop his way up to a wider rooftop and looks up with a shaky grin at Ray's pale face. Thanks for the save, he whispers. Zero has pulled ahead of him and Ojiro is catching up as well. Izuku shrugs off the rest of the jittery alarm, pulls full cowl back together, and charges forward again. He makes a valiant effort and manages to leave Ojiro behind again, but Zero reaches All Might before he does. Disappointed, Izuku touches down on the final rooftop and stumbles to a halt to catch his breath. Zero's laughing, not derisively, but a shaky, good-natured laugh that loosens the twisting frustration in Izuku's chest. Damn, Midoriya, he says, sounding breathless from effort. That was close. If you hadn't slipped like that, I don't think I could have caught you. Oh crap, did you hit your face on the way down? What? The word is barely out when he feels a warm trickle down his upper lip and tastes salt and iron. Oh. I guess I did. Whoops. He almost wipes his bleeding nose, but decides at the last moment that he'd rather not get blood on his new costume again. The others reach the finish soon after, Ojiro, then Ida, and finally Ashido all touch down on the final rooftop to the sound of All Might's booming greetings. You've all done well, he tells them. Young Zero may have placed first, but I can see that all of you have made progress, both in physical ability and the application of your quirks. Well done. Keep at it, and you'll all do well in the end-of-term exams. Izuku feels his stomach drop, and the glow of All Might's praise sours as it lands on him. In all the recent flurry of events and excitement, it had slipped his mind that the term is ending and exams are only weeks away. Ida takes one look at him and promptly flies off the handle in appropriate Ida fashion. I turn around and you're bleeding again, he remarks the moment All Might is finished speaking. Midoriya, how? Slipped, Midoriya says. Anyone have a tissue? As it turns out, All Might has tissues. They are imprinted with tiny rabbit shapes. As his teacher moves closer to press one into Izuku's hands, his voice barely reaches Izuku's ears. "Your progress in 1 week is remarkable, my boy," he murmurs. His back is to the others. "I almost didn't recognize you." Izuku hides his smile by pressing the tissue to his bleeding nose. "All might isn't done. When this lesson is over, come see me in the teacher's lounge," he says. "We need to talk." For a moment, Izuku meets Miss Shimoa's eyes over All Might's shoulder. She gives him a soft smile, glowing with quiet pride. "It's time I told you a few things about One for All. It's probably yet another sign of Toshinori's ill fit in the teacher role that he would rather fight armies of villains with one hand behind his back than have this conversation. It's his own fault, really. On 2 counts. He should have made this conversation happen months ago, before villains attacked the USJ, before school started, maybe even before he'd passed his quirk to young Midoriya in the first place. Maybe he should have opened with this all those months ago when he'd first stretched out his hand and offered the boy his quirk. He hadn't because he hadn't thought he'd need to. And the fact that he does need to is also his fault. Had he been more thorough, then maybe, but no. Toshinori is afraid. He is afraid of having this conversation because young Midoriya has formed a habit of exceeding his expectations, and today's exercise left him bursting with pride and hope, but this. More than anything, this conversation might end up being a deal-breaker. Dutifully, Midoriya shows up to the break room to see him, face blandly curious in a way that makes Toshinori's get twist with guilt. He wonders what the boy expects out of this meeting. He schools his face into a carefully blank mask. The smile is harder to fake in this form, so he doesn't try. "Lock the door behind you," he says. Moments later, Midoriya is sitting before him, nursing the cup of tea that Toshinori offered him. Tea is the least he can offer. "To begin," he says, "I heard about what happened in Hoso. I've received your message as well. I'm sorry I wasn't near enough to help you." Midoriya jumps. No, that's all right. I didn't expect you to, it turned out fine. It was touch and go for a while, but it was nice, getting out of it without shuddering something like I usually do." He wrings his right hand. "It's a step up from last time. And the time before that. And all the times, pretty much. You found a way to harness One for All more efficiently. This time, the smile comes more easily. I saw how you moved today. Your control is coming along, and your reflexes are excellent." Midoriya coughs a little and takes a sip of tea. "Right, yeah. I've been working on that," he mumbles. "Something did occur to me, though, about Stair. He ingested some of your blood, did he not? Is that a problem?" "Not as such." Toshinori shakes his head. "Do you remember what I told you when I first passed One for All to you?" Midoriya answers with an eerily accurate imitation of himself. "Now eat this," the boy replies, and that's uncanny. Toshinori almost chirks on his own tea. "Not quite what I meant," he says. "Well, that's the part that stuck with me," Midoriya answers. Does that take practice?" Midoriya's face colors slightly, and all of a sudden he seems supremely interested in his tea. "Maybe. Well, anyway, I was referring to what I said about One for All," Toshinori continues. "And how it passes through DNA." He pushes on before Midoriya can reply. "I wasn't sure if you'd be worried, since Stair drank your blood. It can only be passes on intentionally. It cannot be taken forcibly or accidentally." "I didn't even think of that," Midoriya admits. "So, I guess that means I wasn't really worried about it." Good. Toshinori hesitates, trying not to chew on his own tongue. "Was that what you wanted to tell me about One for All?" Midoriya asks. His eyes are on Toshinori, wide and expectant, like he knows that the answer is no. "No. I'm sure you've been wondering how such a power came to be. He can do this. He just has to ease into it. Tell it to him like how Nana told you. Its origins lie in the very beginning of Quirk society, when powers first began to emerge." He glances at his student. "You're familiar with the history, I'm sure." "I know that Quirks basically threw everything into chaos for a while," Midoriya replies hesitantly. Back when being quirkless was the norm and humanity started to gain these powers, people were scared and there was a lot of social upheaval, and it sort of, I guess everything else sort of ground to a halt while people dealt with that. He shrugs. I read some famous quote that said would have reached interstellar travel by now if it hadn't been for quirks. Toshinori nods. Correct. And, unfortunately, it is in times of great upheaval that a certain type of person finds opportunities to gain power. His student falls quiet, watching him. In that time, there was a man who was born with a unique ability to steal the powers of those around him, take them by force, either to keep or to give away as he saw fit. Unfortunately, most humans he granted powers can't handle the strain of multiple quirks, and it destroys them from the inside. They might still be physically healthy, but their minds don't survive. He pauses. Perhaps this sounds familiar to you. Numu, Midoriya murmurs. Got it in one. Toshinori sighs. He used this power to raise armies of mindlessly loyal henchmen or to remove threats, and before long he ended up ruling Japan's criminal underworld. At some point he must have gained a quirk that stopped him from aging in order to prolong his own reign. I don't know his name. I doubt anyone does anymore, aside from him. He's only known by the name of his quirk, All for One. The title still tastes foul on his tongue. Midoriya doesn't reply, aside from a slight shudder. But he had a younger brother, weak, frail, and seemingly quirkless, who opposed him. Eventually All for One used his power to grant him a quirk, though I don't know why. Perhaps to subjugate him as well, or out of some sense of pity or familial loyalty. At this, Midoriya sits up straight. A brother? Yes. One who he granted a quirk that stockpiles physical power. And, unbeknownst to either of them before that point, the brother did have a quirk all along, just one that hadn't made itself known. An invisible quirk, Midoriya says, leaning forward. Toshinori raises his eyebrows. So you've heard of them? One of the doctors my mom talked to thought I might have one, back when I was little, the boy answers. What was it? His original quirk, I mean. Simply a power that allowed itself to be passed along from person to person. Toshinori takes a deep breath. Which I'm sure also sounds familiar. And so, the two quirks combined within him, forming. One for all, Midoriya finishes in a hushed voice. Toshinori nods. That is the origin of this power, my boy. It was, his voice catches. It was born with a purpose. All for One's brother ultimately failed to stop him, and so he passed his quirk to another in the hopes that the accumulation of strength would be enough to defeat him. And on it went through the generations until now. Silence stretches between them as thick as smoke. It clogs Toshinori's ears like a solid mass. His student has gone from hushed to mute. His eyes are on Toshinori's, boring into him, searching his face as if taking a measure of his soul. They flicker toward Toshinori's side, where his work shirt covers the twisted mass of scarring. With some effort, he continues. My own predecessor tried to defeat him and failed. The word sticks in his throat, a choking pain that burns just as sharply as the day she fell. He knows, he reminds himself. He knows about her. Gran Torino told him already. And I made my own attempt, which resulted in the injury that I've hidden from the public, and I thought, He clears his throat because his voice almost cracked, and that won't do at all. I thought I was successful. For years I thought he had died in our fight, but recent events lead me to believe otherwise. Guilt roils in his belly like nausea. And if he is still alive, then it is quite likely, my boy, that you will have to face him yourself one day. And with that, it's out. There's no taking it back now. By rights he never should have kept quiet in the first place, but there's no fixing it now. There's no changing the fact that Toshinori failed his student years before he'd even met him, and now Midoriya knows about it. The silence is deafening now. There's no clock in this room, and Toshinori wishes desperately that there were. Even a maddening tick-tick-tick of seconds would be better than the utter void of sound that follows his quiet confession. Desperation wins out, forcing more words from his tongue. I think I owe you an apology, my boy, Toshinori says. I told you none of this and hinted at none of this when I first offered you my power. And if I deceived you in any way, that was not my intention. It must be a lot to ask for you to join such a deadly fight that you have no prize taken, but at the time, I hoped he had died, and he hurt you. Toshinori can't help it, he all but jumps when his student speaks. Is it his fault that young Midoriya shifts so abruptly from dead silence to noise? Pardon, he manages to say. His student won't look at him now. His eyes are fixed upon the tea in front of him, one finger tracing lightly over the rim. All for one, he says, and there's something in his tone, something buried deep that Toshinori can only hear if he hunts for it. He heard you. I believe I said that, yes, Toshinori replies, and his side twinges. Midoriya's eyes flicker briefly in the direction of Toshinori's old wound, then back down to his tea. It's not just that, he continues, his tone still blank and neutral. He took someone from you. Someone important. Up come the eyes again, meeting Toshinori's only for a moment. Someone you loved. He's not sure he likes where this discussion is headed. Midoriya. It's okay, Midoriya tells him. It's not something you couldn't talk about it to anyone. Right? And now it still feels wrong to try, even though by rights you should be able to. There is little Toshinori can think to say to that, except, well, yes, I suppose. Midoriya nods. I'm not trying to dig for more information about that. You don't have to talk about her yet if you don't want to. He purses his lips. I just wanted to, make it clear, I guess. That I know. And that means he's hurt you twice over. And that means I have all the reason I need. Tita want to fight him. He feels his heart drop to his stomach. Midoriya, he says, and urgency creeps into his tone. My boy, I'm genuinely touched that you would think that way, but that can't be a reason. That shouldn't be a reason. He shakes his head because he knows. He remembers he can never forget how it felt, feeling Nana's pain as if it were his own, wanting to scream and cry and rage against anyone and anything that had ever spared a thought toward hurting her. He remembers the pain of the loss, the rage that haunted his dreams, filling him with a sick, twisting desire for retribution. You can't, that's a mistake, Midoriya. This isn't about grudges, or punishment, or personal satisfaction. It is simply a duty to the world, do you understand? It's not my only reason, Midoriya nearly whispers. I have others. I'm just saying that, at the end of the day, it's the only reason I need. He draws in his shoulders, curling in on himself as much as the situation allows. Can I admit something? Urgency turns to concern. Of course. Is something troubling you? He mentally kicks himself, stupid question. After the boy's harrowing experience in Hosa, he's gone and dropped another mental bomb on him. Of course something is troubling him. When I fought against Thane. Midoriya's fingertips are wide against the cup. I was scared. Of course you were, Toshinori says gently. You remember what I told you, remember? All heroes feel fear. I know, but when I was fighting him, I was scared, and it made me move faster. His hands shake. And I was angry, and it made me hit harder. And tears gather in the boy's eyes, and he blinks rapidly as if trying to wipe them away with his eyelids. I was scared because I didn't want to watch Ida and Todoroki die, and I was angry because Stain was trying to kill them. And All Might, I swear, I would have fought him if it was anybody in that alley, but I don't know if I would have been as scared or as angry if it hadn't been them, and I don't, Tez tricked down his face. I think even people who save lives for selfish reason can still be heroes, but I don't want to be selfish, and does that make me selfish? And Toshinori can't know what's going on in young Midoriya's head, just like he can't feel the ghost of a hand on his shoulder, or hear a whisper in the air that answers nah, kidda, that just makes you honest. His student finally releases the cup from his white-knuckled hands, and Toshinori sees them fidget and ring strangely in Midoriya's lap. So all he says, in the end, is, at the moment, my boy, you have my permission to be selfish. Watery grey eyes meet his again, wide with shock. From the moment I met you, young Midoriya, you've been an absolute pillar of selflessness, from charging into danger for the sake of someone whom you didn't get along with, to sacrificing your own advancement for, well, the sake of someone whom you didn't get along with. It's quite inspiring, my boy, but it must be exhausting. Midoriya's next sniffle sounds encouragingly close to a quiet chuckle, and he lifts his arm to wipe his eyes. You, a little. Yes. Well. Toshinori coughs awkwardly into his sleeve. If your version of selfishness is, I will fight extra hard to protect those close to me, then I'd say there are worse ways to be selfish. And you are a student still, my boy. You're learning. No one is born with the perfect mindset for a symbol of pace. It will come with time and experience and training. So please, he tries a smile. Learn to forgive yourself, won't you? After a moment of thought, his student manages a shaky little grin in return. I'll try. Good. Toshinori takes a sip of tea and finds his eyes drawn back to his students' hands. They are scarred and battered, even more so than after the sports festival. Many of those new marks and bruises will fade and heal, but it's still a stark reminder of how much his charge punishes his hands. As Toshinori watches, he sees them move and fidget again, and a moment later he realizes why it's so mesmerizing to him. Oh, is that sign language, my boy? Midoriya jolts in his seat, eyes wide. What? Oh. Right. Why yes. Sorry, it's a nervous tick. He looks so sheepish that Toshinori can't help but smile. Still muttering, then he says. With your hands instead of your mouth. Something like that, yeah. Midoriya shifts in his seat. Turns out people won't tell you to be quiet if you talk to yourself with just your hands. I see. Toshinori frowns at his student's hands and then his own. I might try learning myself. Ah, really? It seems like a useful skill, Toshinori says with a shrug. Besides, you and I have quite a few secrets shared between us, don't we? I see no downside to being able to communicate discreetly. That's true. Midoriya takes his cup and drinks from it again, holding it in both hands as if to make sure they keep still. After a moment, now dry-eyed, he looks up again. I had sort of an idea. To tell. Well, if you start of learning, numbers and words for time, like minutes and hours, then, in class, if you're in your hero form and you're running out of time, you could let me know. I could maybe, I don't know, cover for you or something. He shrugs. Just a thought. A slow smile spreads across Toshinori's face again. It's a good one, he says. Well, I believe I have a trip to the library in my future. But out of curiosity, how do you say minutes or hours? Midoriya brightens at the question, and Toshinori can only smile wider as his student leaps at the chance to teach. Chapter 25. The world is upside down for the briefest of moments, and then Izuku lands flat on his back in the grass. He's gotten better at this, landing, that is, and manages to avoid having the wind punched out of him like it was the first few times Todoroki knocked his feet out from under him. Besides avoiding serious and unnecessary injury, Todoroki doesn't really do gentle when it comes to sparring. Not that that's a bad thing, their wounds from Hosu are scars and memories now, and neither of them need or want to be handled with kid gloves. That's not what this is about. He ticks his head back and finds Todoroki's upside-down face watching him with minimal concern. They've sparred enough by now to figure out each other's limits, and a fairly smooth landing on soft grass falls well short of Izuku's. Show me that again. Izuku says, even as he mentally runs through the maneuver. He didn't have a good view of Todoroki's footwork, but whatever it was deft enough to flip Izuku like an omelette. He sits up, batting bits of grass from his hair, and rolls his shoulders as he gets back to his feet. They are shy of evenly matched when they fight without quirks. Izuku can hold his own well enough, and what he lacks in training and experience, he makes up for with raw strength, quick thinking, and the odd underhanded move. Todoroki still has more wins than he does, but Izuku hoards his victories jealously. It takes 2 more tries for Izuku to figure out exactly what Todoroki's move is, and a 3rd try to effectively counter it. That time, Izuku avoids the grab and twist, and wastes no time in counterattacking with a simple but effective throw Ms. Shimoa once taught him. He hears a grunt of alarm as Todoroki feels himself going off balance, and Izuku sends him tumbling to the grass before he can correct himself. By the time Todoroki catches his breath and sits up, Izuku's already diving for the notebook he left by their jackets and water bottles. That didn't take long, Todoroki remarks. Toss me my water. Izuku does so. Could have been faster, he replies, splitting his brain between the words coming out of his mouth and those coming out of his pen. Certainly can't ask a villain to stop a fight to show me a move again. Thanks, by the way. It's good practice. Todoroki caps his bottle. Helps to be able to demonstrate it to someone instead of just going through the motions on my own, or he hesitates and doesn't finish the thought. I remember things better. Work out what I'm doing wrong. And his voice trails off. Ray catches Izuku's eye, signing something with a wide grin when he looks up from his notebook. Izuku cracks a smile of his own. It's okay, Todoroki, you can say it's more fun this way. I won't judge. His friend looks at him sharply. It's training. It's not supposed to be fun. Izuku thinks back to all the little jokes that Miss Shimoa has cracked with him, or at his expense, while showing him how to escape a headlock or throw a punch without spraining his wrist. He remembers Uraraka victory dancing after completing a rescue exercise in class, and Ida going needlessly over the top when role-playing a victim, and Ashida shrieking with laughter somewhere behind him when she heard him whooping as he bounded through the obstacle course with full cowl. Can't relate, he says. I'm not surprised. It's almost a scoff. You turn everything into a jerk. There's something in his tone, something flat, almost disparaging, that makes Izuku bristle in spite of himself. What of it? He asked sharply. You don't think that might be a bad habit? Todoroki turns to him, as calm and unruffled as ever. You may be strong, but that doesn't mean you should be wasting time making snide remarks when you're fighting villains. He turns back to his bottle, swishing the water inside it absently. I'd think you of all people would take this seriously. Izuku purses his lips to keep from scowling, because their lives have been vastly different up to now, and it's not his fault or Todoroki's, but Todoroki doesn't get it. You think I don't take things seriously just because I run my mouth sometimes? Just because I try to stop and be happy with what I'm doing once in a while? It's not just once in a while, Todoroki points out. You might have caught up to Sira faster in that rescue race if you hadn't wasted energy messing around. PFF, Izuku rolls his eyes. If I can't have fun pulling sweet flips, then what is even the point of having superpowers? You're doing it again. I'm not, Izuku stops, frustrated. Look. You're not getting it. Enlighten me, then. It's just, he hesitates again, racking his brain for the right words to get the thoughts and feelings out of his head. It's not a distraction, first of all. If anything, it makes me focus more. Todoroki looks skeptical. So far I've been in mortal danger twice. He stops. The slime villain, it feels like a lifetime ago. 3 times. No, 4. Don't ask. And every single time, I've been on the verge of panic. It's like a wave coming in. And I'm in the shallows, I guess, and I can feel it coming, and I know when it gets to me, I'll start drowning and I'll be no use to anyone then. So I crack a joke. Or I make a stupid comment. I find something funny. Or I find something not funny and make it funnier in my head. And when I do that, the wave takes that much longer to get to me. The more I do it, the longer I can keep my head above water, I guess. Sorry, that analogy got away from me. He plucks a blade of grass and spins it between his fingers. I can't stop it from reaching me, but I can push it back and push it back until I do what needs to be done. And maybe if I do it out loud, I can keep other people from drowning too. Dropping the blade, he shrugs. I mean, you sort of did it, back then. Todoroki tilts his head. Back when? Before we started fighting Stair. I said we couldn't win, and you said we could at least make it look cool. I dunno, it made me laugh. For 2 seconds I stopped thinking about how likely it was that we were gonna die. Todoroki is quiet for a moment. I guess that makes sense. It's not always like that, Izuku admits with a shrug. Sometimes I just lose my temper and mouth off. Still serves a purpose. Keeps villains talking, or maybe if I make them mad enough, they'll go after me instead of anyone else. Todoroki sets aside his water bottle and gets back to his feet. In that case, you need more practice. You're no use to anyone if a villain kills you for giving them lip. True. Izuku takes a quick swig of water and follows him up. They are an hour and a half into their training get-together when Izuku starts to flight a little. It's not that he's tired, he's on his second wind, with enough breath in him to carry on a conversation while he fights, but is vaguely troubled, or at least distracted. Something wrong? Todoroki asks in the middle of fighting him. Not really. Just what you said about bad habits. Izuku feints a jab at his head, but Todoroki doesn't take the bait. Something Gran Torino told me. Todoroki throws a kick, Izuku intercepts and tries to throw him off balance, but Todoroki twists free and falls back into his steady stance. When I was interning with him, was that you risk forming weird habits if you. Izuku makes the first move and lands a solid hit on Todoroki's midriff that sends him staggering back. He continues the onslaught, but it's too reckless. Todoroki gets a solid hold on him and kicks his foremost foot out from under him. Time seems to slow as he feels himself fall. Izuku grabs onto Todoroki and twists, taking him down with him. Only spar against one person, he finishes, slightly winded. School training probably makes up for that, Todoroki says, disentangling himself to stand again. Once more. Izuku nods and waits for him to attack. This time, Todoroki gets a good grip on him. The fight is moving a bit too fast for Izuku's coherent thoughts to keep up, but there's something instinctual about his distribution of balance and the shifting of Todoroki's weight that makes him think, I'm going to fall if I don't do something. Something ends up being lashing out with his single free hand. It's a controlled jab, which is probably a good thing because he hits Todoroki right in the throat. His friend makes a strangled noise and hesitates, his grip loosening, allowing Midoriya to slip free and overbalance him gently. You okay? He asks the moment Todoroki's back touches the ground. I didn't hit you too hard, did I? Wasn't expecting that, Todoroki wheezes, rubbing the spot where Izuku hit him. Not very sporting. Relieved, Izuku lets some of the tension from his shoulders. Since when have I ever been sporting? Good point. Todoroki sits up with a grunt of effort. You fight dirty. I fight smart. Midoriya grins and offers him a hand. If you're the hand crusher, I can be the throat puncher. Fair enough. Todoroki takes his hand, then yanks him forward, plants one foot on Izuku's chest, and uses it to flip him as overhead into the grass. So has anyone heard what the final practical exams actually are? Ochako asks. They are fairly early for first period, not either early, but respectable. She'd run into Deku just outside the gate, and before long Todoroki had ended up unobtrusively slipping in beside them. It's taking a little getting used to having Todoroki join them so often, especially since his fight with Deku got so intense. She still has no idea what that was about, and neither of them seem to be in any hurry to enlighten her. Oh well. Not like it's any of her business. I heard something about giant robots, I guess. Deku says, though he doesn't sound quite convinced. I dunno, after everything that's happened, I'm not sure if a repeat of the entrance exam is the way they're gonna go. Especially after everyone pretty much rolled right over those 0-pointers at the sports festival. Personally, I'm not convinced of anything until there's an actual announcement, Todoroki says flatly. I wouldn't put it past them to keep it under wraps and let rumors spread before they catch us off guard. HMPH, Ochako pouts. At least we get study guides for the academic exams. It's practical in the long run, Todoroki points out. Heroes get caught in unfamiliar and unexpected situations all the time. Makes sense that exams would replicate it. Besides, I hear Principal Nedzo likes playing tricks. Logical ruses, Deku says with a gloomy sigh. Any more logical ruses and I might as well just question reality all the time. Are we really eating lunch for an hour every day, or is it a mass hallucination? Does homework exist? Maybe everything's made up and our grades don't even matter. Ochako groans loudly. Deku, no, it's too early for an existential crisis. It's never too early for an existential crisis, Todoroki says sullenly, and Ochako is surprised enough to laugh. On their way to homeroom, Deku waxes lyrical about some new up-and-coming hero he saw on the news, and Ochako catches sight of Aizawa-sensei and present MIC off to the side, standing by a closed door to one of UA's many school storage rooms. Ochako can count on one hand the number of times she's seen Aizawa-sensei before the start of class. She's always just assumed that he naps in the teacher's lounge until the warning bell. But here he is, as scruffy and sleepy as ever, while present MIC chats with him about something she's not close enough to hear. As they wander closer to their two teachers, Ochako wonders at the fact that such wildly different people can end up as close as the two of them seem to be. Aizawa-sensei is always so stiff and serious underneath that lazy facade, the most dour and humorless person Ochako has ever met. And yet he's friends with present MIC, of all people. And they are friends, she can tell. Aizawa-sensei isn't just pretending to put with him, or anything. He never tries to match present MIC's, well, everything, but he looks perfectly comfortable to stand near him and absorb all the excitement and smiles, like an emotion black hole. Ochako finds her gaze drawn toward Deku and Todoroki, right when Deku punches the air for some reason to punctuate what he's saying, and Todoroki, blank-faced, nods like it's the most natural thing in the world. Ha! The three of them pass close enough to catch what Aizawa-sensei and MIC-sensei are saying. And it's got to be here somewhere, she is present MIC mother. You forgot the key, Aizawa-sensei says flatly. I was in a rush, present MIC answers, methodically padding through each and every pocket on his costume. I got called in an hour ago to help deal with a criminal who's been on my radar, and I didn't have time to double-check. You pulled an all-might. It's not my fault supply closets require actual keys instead of a sensible keycard swipe like the rest of this place. You're a rocker. Deku taps her on the shoulder, bringing her attention back to him. Could I borrow a bobby pin? She's only half listening as she digs into the pocket. HM. Oh. Sure, Deku, I always have extras. He takes it. Thanks. I should specify, I know I said a borrow, but you might not get this back. It's no big deal, she assures him. Those things come in packs of like 500. Thanks, he says, and breaks away from the two of them. Deku, where are you? Aizawa knows that this is going to be a day. This is how it always starts, simple as one of the shelter cats hawking on the carpet or Yamada forgetting his damn keys. It starts simple, but it starts early, and Aizawa functions on too little sleep on the best of days. He's not in the mood for a day. We are wasting time, he says. Kiyoma should be here by now, and we can borrow hers for. He's distracted from finishing his sentence when Midoriya quietly nudges his way between them and steps up to the locked supply room door. Midoriya, what? Yamada begins, before the boy slides a bobby pin into the keyhole. It takes less time than it would have for Yamada to search the rest of his pockets. It's quick, efficient, and practiced. The lock clicks and Midoriya twists the handle and tugs it open a few inches, more to test the door than actually open it. Excuse me, he says, quiet and polite as anything, and walks back to where Uraraka and Todoroki are waiting for him. Uraraka is looking at him like he just grew a second head. Aizawa doesn't blame her. Shada, Yamada says as the kids move off. I'll ask again, what are you teaching those kids? It's a useful skill, he answers. Besides, I didn't teach him anything. That one came like that. Midoriya is an odd one, he knows that much. There's something about him that Aizawa can't put a finger on, and the frustrating thing is that Aizawa knows, with zero evidence and every fiber of his being, that he should be able to. It's not some nebulous feeling, there's something very concrete about Midoriya that he should know but doesn't. Well, this saves us a trip to the teacher's lounge, Yamada says, breaking him out of his thoughts. And we can fake your student's tragic criminal past, I guess. This is still going to be a day. He can feel it. Did you know he could do that? Ochako asks, the moment Deku has moved to his desk and out of earshot. Todoroki shrugs. You've known him longer than I have. It's simple enough to put her friend's previously unknown skills out of her mind. They are doing combat training today, and that's enough to leave her vibrating with excitement. The class pairs off by random assignment for sparring practice. Ashida gets a stroke of bad luck and ends up with Mineta. Ochako isn't close enough to hear what he says, but Aizawa-sensei is, and he promptly has him switch partners with Shuja. Mineta bursts into tears when he finds himself assigned to spar with Bakugo. Ochako's luck is comparatively top tier, and she and Deku grin at each other across the mat before Aizawa-sensei has them begin. Less than 2 minutes later, he crashes into the ceiling. Sorry. Ochako calls up. I tried to catch you, but... It's fine. Deku yells back down to her. Some of their classmates are starting to stare. She can hear Kaminari laughing. It's fine, it's my own fault, just his quirk manifests in that green lightning she'd seen before on the screen during the rescue race exercise. He kicks off of the ceiling, powerfully enough to bring him within reach. Ochako stretches to her toes and hops up to reach his outstretched hand with all 5 fingers, then darts out of the way when he lands. He sticks it, though, and it looks reasonably cool. Or it would if he weren't already muttering something to himself. Want to try that again, she asks. Yeah. I've got it this time. And he does have it if Ochako is any judge, because from then on he's a lot smarter about keeping her from grabbing him. Sparring with Deku is a lot different from fighting with Bakugo. She doubts he'll be bringing out those limb-shattering attacks anymore now that he has a much safer and more efficient way to use his quirk. Of course, this is also a much more controlled environment than the sports festival was, and Ochako doubts Aizawa-sensei will be as slow to step in as Cementos and Midnight were if things get too rough. Either way, Deku can't drive her back and keep her at a distance with long-range attacks. Unlike Bakugo, who kept blasting her back every time she tried to get close, Deku settles for being slippery and quick when she does. It's almost infuriating how quick he is. Ochako's back hits the mat twice before she manages to use her quirk on him again. This time, he snags her arm before he can float all the way up to the ceiling. Dangling in the wrong direction, he flashes her a bright smile. "High five me." "Only if it means I won," she retorts. Instead of answering, he pulls her arm for leverage and reaches for her hand. With a yelp, she realizes what he's doing and curls her fingers into a fist. Undeterred, he clings to her wrist and tries to pry them loose. "Deku. It's not over until I'm on the ceiling." He's almost laughing. "Oh, that does it." Ochako digs into a week of training with Gunhead and struggles with him, fighting to twist free, but he keeps catching her and going for her hands again. Finally, he gets a hold of her wrist and she slips up and grabs him back with all 5 fingers. Deku yelps as gravity returns to him and tries to correct himself, but all this accomplishes is making him land perpendicular to her rather than in a more compromising position. Not that that stops Mineta from howling with utter glee before Bakugo blasts him halfway across the room. If someone had told Ochako before now that she would ever feel genuinely grateful to Bakugo for something, she would have rolled her eyes. Zero and Ida are close enough to see it, and they actually have to pause their spar because Zero is laughing too hard to put up a proper defense, and then Ida is too busy scolding him for it to put up a proper offense. Highly disrespectful and unprofessional. Zero, please, we mustn't waste time, better spend training. Zero's almost crying. Aizawa-sensei strolls up as Deku apologizes profusely and Ochako climbs to her feet, rubbing her head where it struck the ground. It feels bruised, but she doesn't feel dizzy enough to worry about a concussion. "I'm fine," she says for the 5th time within a minute, either to Deku or to their homeroom teacher. "I just landed weird." Aizawa checks her pupils for a moment before agreeing with her, and then everyone's attention is arrested. Todoroki and Ojiro's fight is getting a little intense. Fighting with people nearby must mean that Todoroki can't unleash his quirk the way he would normally want to, so he's forced to fight in close quarters against the one person in their entire class who's insanely good in close quarters. Todoroki's insanely good, too, so it makes for a pretty close match. Other pairs are pausing to watch, and Aizawa-sensei doesn't tell anyone to get back to their own practice. He probably figures they can learn something from watching them fight. Ochako leaves off rubbing her sore head and tries to. Sparring with Gunhead was great, but she wasn't with him long enough to learn moves like this. Deku is just as intent as she is. She sees his fingers twitch at his sides, like he's riding imaginary knights. The match gets crazy close, so close that for a moment, Ochako is sure that Ojiro is going to knock Todoroki off his feet. But at the last minute, Todoroki lashes out, Ojiro chokes, and a second later he's landing on his tail on the mat. Beside her, Deku makes a noise that sounds almost like a laugh. "Sorry." She's close enough to hear Todoroki's sheepish tone. "Wasn't expecting that," Ojiro wheezes. "If you need to go to recovery, girl, go," Aizawa tells him. Ojiro gives a thumbs up. "I'm fine." "Hey, come on, man." Kirishima calls over, glaring at Todoroki. "Did you seriously just punch him in the throat?" "That's a cheap shot, Todoroki. Keep in mind that most villains aren't above moves like that." Aizawa-sensei raises his voice so that everyone can hear. By this point, the whole class is paying attention. You aren't here to learn a sport, you are here to learn how to deal with villains. And in a fight, you perform how you practice. If you practice expecting your opponent to fight fair, then you won't last long. Besides, his eyes glint. There's no such thing as fairness in a fight for your life. If underhanded tactics are necessary to save lives and a conflict before more people get hurt, then swallow your pride and use them. He looks to Todoroki. That being said, this is still only training. I was being gentle, Todoroki answers. He really was. Ojiro's on his feet again, rubbing his neck, but he looks okay. I could tell. Still caught me off guard. Man, Zero remarks, loud enough for most of the class to hear. Who would have thought Todoroki could fight dirty? Necessary or not, fighting like that's pretty shady for a hero. That's what I told him, Todoroki says, shooting a withering look at Deku. No. Deku almost sputters. No, you don't get to call me out for a cheap shot right after you used it and it worked. Wait, what? Ochiko turns to him, confused. I don't remember you throat punching him in the sports festival. Almost instantly Deku goes from comically incensed to sheepish. Wasn't in the sports festival. We spar after school twice a week, Todoroki adds. What? Bakugo roars from the other side of the room, loud enough that Deku startles like a rabbit. It's good practice, Deku says. If you're all done discussing your classmates' work ethic, and no one needs to visit the nurse, then you can return to your assigned training. Aizawa-sensei breaks in before the discussion can continue. His brow furrows and he looks from Deku to Todoroki. As for you two, keep in mind that there are rules in place regardless of whether or not school is in session and breaking them. We don't use quirks, Midoriya cuts in. It's just hand-to-hand. Good. Continue, everyone. Ochiko tries to focus on the rest of the class. It's not as easy as it should be, with the gears turning in her head the way they are. The moment school is done for the day, she packs her things hastily and waits for Deku to do the same. She thinks at first that they'll probably have to track down Todoroki, but once again Deku's new friend falls in with them. Ever since the sports festival and the week of internships, the trio of her, Deku, and Ida has become a quartet with Todoroki alone. The moment they are all occupying the same physical space, she speaks up. I want in. Deku gives her an owlish blink. Huh? Ochiko takes a deep breath. On your after-school sparring thing. When do you guys get together? Mondays and Wednesdays, usually. Sometimes weekends. Deku looks taken aback. Honestly, it's like he doesn't even know her. Okay, look, I understand if it's your thing, like your two-person manly bonding sessions, but if it's okay with you, I'd like to get in on it too. Ochiko bounces on the balls of her feet. I only have 1 week of combat training outside of what we all do in class together, and I want to do more. When I look at you guys and Bakugo and Ojiro and everybody, I feel like I'm falling behind and I want to catch up. So I want in. If that's okay. It's okay with me, Deku answers readily. Todoroki. I'm fine with it. He blinks. What was that about manly bonding? Now, wait a minute. Ida breaks in. Are you all quite sure this is safe? The reason why institutions like UA exist is that there are rules in place, and our classes have structures and regulations to help enforce those rules and make sure proper safety procedures are observed. Unsupervised training carries risks. You could always come along, Todoroki interrupts. If you're that worried about it. Yeah. Deku brightens. I bet we'd get a lot more out of it, with 4 of us. For a moment, Ida looks almost flustered. I suppose, as class rep, I do have a responsibility to make sure my fellow students are properly observing rules and regulations. If I'm not unwelcome, I'd be happy to. Plus, final exams are coming up, Deku adds. It could be like a study group for hand-to-hand combat. Apparently, the magic words are study group. Ida goes from hesitant to thoughtfully eager in the blink of an eye. That Wednesday, Izuku meets Todoroki at the park where they usually spar. He's within 10 feet of their meeting place when he stops, jaw dropping. Todoroki, Ida, and Uraraka are already there. So are Ojura, Kaminari, Jiru, Yaoyorozu, and Kirishima, with Bakugo standing beside him looking fully prepared to blow up the first person who speaks. Heya. Kirishima greets him, and Bakugo miraculously doesn't try to explode his face. We heard something about a study group for hand-to-hand combat. Baffled, Izuku glances at Todoroki, who can only offer him a helpless little shrug. At his side, Rei clutches her stomach and laughs.